Chosen one, you said nothing, but heaven stood up. Trumpets didn't have to sound and fire didn't need to fall, because the silence you carried was already shaking realms. While others were fighting for attention, you were surrendering to alignment. While they ran to the crowd, you ran to the secret place. And in that stillness, something divine happened. You weren't losing, you were listening. You weren't weak, you were being woven, thread by thread, into heaven's strategy. And now, the board has shifted, the game has changed. Heaven just declared checkmate in your name. This isn't just another message. This is prophecy wrapped in reminder. You didn't survive all that fire to stay silent forever, but your silence wasn't empty. It was intercession. It was intelligence. It was heaven's camouflage. If something deep in your spirit just recognized itself in these words, go ahead and drop a 777 in the comments. That's not just a number. It's the sign of heaven's stamp, heaven's completion, heaven's justice. And to all of you who've been sowing seeds into this space through your super thanks, I don't take it lightly. Your support is sacred. It's helping this message flow farther than algorithms ever could. I see your generosity. I feel your agreement. I bless it. Now stay with me, because what I'm about to show you will shift the way you see every battle you didn't fight, every insult you didn't answer, every lie you let pass. You thought you were silent because you were tired, but heaven says you were silent because you were strategic. And now, the tables aren't just turning, they're yours. Let's get into it. God's chosen ones, you said nothing, but heaven just declared checkmate. They thought they had you cornered. They mistook your stillness for weakness, your silence for surrender. But what they failed to discern was that stillness is not stagnation. It is calibration. Like the eye of a storm where pressure balances itself in near perfection, your calm was not the absence of conflict. It was the presence of strategy. You weren't immobilized. You were aligned. While they scrambled for visibility, spinning chaos like a spider does silk, you stood in frequency, resonating at a pitch far above their games. Because unlike them, you were never looking for a stage. You were holding a throne. In the book of 2 Chronicles 20:21, when the armies rose against Jehoshaphat, the Lord said, "You will not have to fight this battle. Take up your positions, stand firm, and see the deliverance the Lord will give you." And that's exactly what you did. You stood still, not out of passivity, but because heaven had already declared the outcome. While they launched arrows of provocation, masked as kindness, wrapped in smiles but tipped with venom, you kept your armor on without raising a sword. You saw every passive-aggressive jab, every emotional ambush dressed as concern. You registered their frequencies like seismic waves on spiritual ground. And rather than respond, you recorded. It's the same composure we saw in Jesus during his trial before Pilate, John 19:9. The Son of God, Word made flesh, stood silent as his accusers flailed and barked. That silence wasn't powerlessness, it was dominion. He knew the script, and he knew they were still reading from the wrong page. While they rehearsed their drama, baiting reactions like a magician uses misdirection, you chose precision. This is not a psychological freeze response. This is mastery. Cognitive science calls it executive function under pressure. When the prefrontal cortex overrides the limbic system and selects intention over impulse. You didn't mirror them because you were never meant to reflect dysfunction. You were designed to expose it. And isn't that what Joseph did? Betrayed by brothers, imprisoned unjustly, forgotten by men, but never forgotten by God. Genesis 50:20 captures it perfectly. You intended to harm me, But God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Joseph didn't clap back. He elevated, and so did you. While they craved your collapse as proof that their attacks worked, you became the anomaly in their data, the outlier, the silent variable that renders the formula unstable. You didn't retaliate, you recalibrated. Like a tectonic plate shifting so subtly yet so powerfully it reroutes rivers and splits landscapes, you moved in silence and the ground underneath them cracked. And here's where the checkmate came in. Without warning, without war, just a withdrawal so clean it exposed the scaffolding of their schemes. Just as termites hollow out a tree from the inside, while the bark remains untouched until collapse, you let their illusions rot under the weight of their own deception. No confrontation, no spectacle, just truth. Martin Luther King Jr., the reverend and civil rights titan, once said, "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy." You didn't just stand, you transcended. While they rehearsed offense, you became the embodiment of spiritual resilience. But not everyone chooses that path. There was a corporate strategist, once dubbed a visionary CEO, who manipulated numbers and trust alike. Jeffrey Skilling of Enron. He played the long con, engineered illusions of stability, and demanded applause. But when truth surfaced, his empire crumbled, and so did his legacy, because he mistook deception for strategy and noise for leadership. You, on the other hand, became like a snow leopard on a high ridge, silent, graceful, unseen, until necessary. There was no need to descend to their level because you had already surpassed it. Your silence didn't mean you were unaware. It meant you were aware enough not to disturb divine momentum. And when the moment finally came, it wasn't a battle, it was a reset. Like the African baobab tree, you gathered water in your silence. You stored power, and when the dry season came, while others wilted in exposure, you released what you'd stored, quietly, generously, without spectacle. They didn't expect that, because their entire playbook was built on your participation. But you never came to perform, you came to transform. And in that transformation, you fulfilled Romans 12:21. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Your exit didn't just end the act, it collapsed the theater. They thought your silence was confusion, when in truth, it was a kind of inner engineering, a discipline refined in the furnace of restraint. While they obsessed over triggering you, analyzing your every breath like social scientists, dissecting micro-expressions, they failed to realize the spotlight was no longer on you. It was reflecting their own dysfunction. What they interpreted as emotional fragility was actually data acquisition. You weren't lost in their noise, you were mapping it. Every subtle twitch of manipulation, every cyclical apology, every mood swing dressed as remorse was being archived, not just by memory, but by discernment honed like a neural net, recognizing anomaly. That's the difference between reaction and revelation. You didn't just endure their pressure, you decoded it. Like an architect tracing the hidden stress points in a crumbling structure, you saw the blueprint behind their behavior. And once the pattern became visible, the illusion collapsed. Hebrews 5:14 speaks of this kind of maturity. But solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. You didn't train through peace. You trained in the trenches. They thought they were leading a dance, pulling your emotional strings like a marionette master. But they were the ones on repeat. You were not their puppet. You were their mirror. Every step they took began to expose the choreography of their broken rhythm. Emotional manipulation operates like a looped code, repeating until interrupted. You became that interruption. You didn't retaliate, you observed. And in that observation, something powerful awakened. the ability to see through rather than react to. It's what Daniel did when he was surrounded by political schemes. He didn't confront every accusation. He let the patterns speak for themselves. When the satraps plotted against him, Daniel 6, Daniel stayed consistent, disciplined in prayer, unmoved by their threats. And when their strategy was exposed, they fell into the very trap they set for him. That's how heaven works. It waits until the enemy builds their own gallows, like Haman in the book of Esther. You followed that same principle, not with vengeance but with vision. You learned the rhythm of their disorder, like a wildlife tracker who learns the movements of a predator, not to attack, but to predict. You weren't confused. You were calculating. Their chaos began to echo, familiar in tone, repetitive in execution. Like a thunderstorm that always arrives from the same side of the mountain, you began to anticipate the storm long before they knew they were brewing it. In the realm of physics, this is known as resonant frequency, the natural vibration of an object when exposed to subtle, sustained force. You absorbed their vibrations without letting them fracture you. Instead, you matched their patterns with truth, and truth dismantled their chaos without needing volume. A real-world example, Edith Eva Eger, a psychologist and Holocaust survivor, once said, "I never forget what happened, but I no longer allow it to define me." She spent years decoding the behaviors of those who hurt her, not to hate them, but to understand the architecture of evil. She didn't crumble under pain. She translated it into clarity. That's what you've done. You also mirror the resilience of Omar, a former combat medic turned trauma counselor. After years of silence, absorbing both the violence of war and the emotional volatility of his broken family, he stopped reacting and started remembering. He charted every repeated outburst from his alcoholic father, every moment of false affection followed by emotional withdrawal. And in that silent observation, he became an expert on human triggers. He now teaches veterans how to recognize cycles, not to relive them, but to rewire them. Omar didn't retaliate with rage. He responded with pattern recognition and built a life rooted in peace. But let's not forget what happens when the manipulator clings too tightly to the illusion of control. Take Elizabeth Holmes, once hailed as a visionary tech founder. She crafted a narrative, adjusted her tone, manipulated investor emotion. But over time, her strategies became cyclical, too rehearsed. The calm she exuded after each contradiction wasn't peace, it was programming. And when patterns became undeniable, her empire unraveled in public shame. You, however, chose a different path. Like the northern lights dancing silently above Arctic silence, your power didn't arrive with thunder. It arrived with grace. You walked through their maze without leaving fingerprints. While they pushed, pulled, and postured, you simply watched. And that watchfulness became their undoing. Even the trees know, when the same wind returns season after season, they don't bend in panic. They adjust their roots deeper into the soil. So did you. You went deeper while they stayed surface level, and now the wind can't move you. There came a shift, a moment so subtle yet so seismic that it recalibrated the entire dynamic. Their provocations, once sharp, started to dull. Their familiar tactics no longer activated a response. It wasn't that you grew indifferent, it was that you outgrew the game. When the emotional bait no longer caught reaction, their net unraveled under its own emptiness. They couldn't grasp it, how silence, once a tool they weaponized against you, now turned into an atmosphere they couldn't survive in. Those who thrive on chaos suffocate when peace doesn't flinch. Have you noticed how quickly the ones who controlled the room with tension begin to unravel the moment they're no longer feared? Have you seen how frantic the game becomes when the player refuses to play? In Proverbs 26:11, it says, "As a dog returns to its vomit, so fools repeat their folly." You didn't just step away from the chaos. You recognized its pattern. You saw the loop for what it was. A closed circuit of dysfunction designed to trap you in repetition. But you had learned the language of their rhythm. You knew when the arc would bend toward drama, when the apology would feel rehearsed, when the tension would twist into guilt. And so you chose refusal, not as rebellion, but as elevation. The prophets of old knew this kind of withdrawal. Elijah didn't argue with Jezebel when she sent her threats. He withdrew to the mountain where he met God in the whisper. 1 Kings 19:12. The unraveling of disorder doesn't happen with confrontation. It happens with clarity. That's what you carried, the clarity to walk out before the loop reset. Not to prove anything, not to punish, but to protect the oil on your life. This is the paradox that shattered their illusion. They thought they were bending someone breakable, but in their constant pressure, they forged something unshakable. Psychologically, this is called post-traumatic growth, when adversity catalyzes depth instead of damage. What they mistook for fragility was actually resilience under refinement. Look at the redwood tree. To the naked eye, it appears static, but beneath the surface, its roots don't just go deep. They interlock with the roots of other trees in the forest. It stands because it is connected. You became like that, silent on the outside, networked in the unseen. And when the storm passed, you were the one still standing, not because you fought back, but because you anchored deeper. You mirror the inner wisdom of Imani, a Haitian-born nurse practitioner who spent 10 years serving in high-conflict zones. After being publicly undermined by a superior who feared her growing influence, she chose not to expose him. Instead, she quietly pursued her doctorate, applied her field experience to global health policy, and is now shaping trauma-informed protocols across 5 nations. Her silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. Then there's Lucian, a rising creative director at a luxury branding agency who endured 3 years of psychological microaggressions and sabotage from his envious project manager. Rather than retaliate, Lucian built his own branding consultancy on the side. When layoffs came, he walked away with 3 clients already in hand. The manager let go in silence, without ceremony. Lucian became unreadable. The manager became irrelevant. But what happens when the manipulator refuses to adjust, believing their tactics are still effective? Look at Carlos Martetti, a former political consultant in South America known for sowing confusion to gain control. He created scandals behind closed doors, then claimed credit for cleaning them up. For years, his strategy worked until it didn't. A junior aide trained quietly by those he underestimated exposed a predictable playbook. Carlos was ousted not with fanfare but with silence, a memo, a signature, a disappearance. He mistook surface control for true influence, and it cost him everything. You didn't need a grand exit, you just needed accuracy. You walked out like mist lifting from morning grass, quiet, sacred, irreversible. No speech, no final blow, just a calm exit fueled by knowing that staying would have required you to shrink, to lie, to loop. And the cost of that was too high for someone carrying legacy. Have you ever considered what kind of courage it takes to walk away without explanation? What strength it demands to choose clarity over closure and peace over performance? Isaiah 30:15 says, "In quietness and trust is your strength." You chose both. And now the tension lives not in your life, but in their confusion, because they calculated you in decimal points, never realizing you were an equation they couldn't solve. They rehearsed their strategies in cycles, but you became unreadable, like quantum particles, shifting states the moment they tried to measure you. What shakes them now is not your volume, but your clarity. What dismantled their agenda wasn't vengeance, it was the absence of need. And what frightened them most was that the one they thought was a pawn had already stepped off the board. They assumed your presence was perpetual, like gravity, always there, always reliable, never questioned. To them, you were the ambient hum of stability in a room filled with noise. They never paused to thank it, never acknowledged the consistency, the devotion, the gentle recalibrations you made to keep everything from falling apart. You became so familiar, so constant, they confused your sacrifice with simplicity. But even the earth has fault lines, and even the most grounded soul has thresholds. What happens when the one holding the structure no longer stands beneath it? What echoes in the heart of a space when the presence that once anchored it slips away? At first, your withdrawal was misread. They thought you were sulking, playing a role in a cycle you had long since outgrown. But when the silence stretched past expectation, when their performance met no audience, when the usual rhythm went unanswered, the discomfort began to creep in. They weren't ready for the kind of quiet that doesn't signal punishment, but closure. It reflects the truth in Lamentations 1:1. How deserted lies the city once so full of people. How like a widow is she, who once was great among the nations. The prophet isn't just mourning loss. He's describing the dissonance of emptiness that follows prolonged neglect. You didn't storm out. You slipped out. Not in bitterness, but in wisdom. And what remained wasn't revenge, it was space. And in that space, clarity rang louder than any confrontation ever could. You interrupted the cycle. The forgiving, returning, fixing, breaking spiral lost its grip. In psychological terms, you disrupted the trauma bond loop, a behavioral pattern where attachment forms through repeated cycles of abuse and reconciliation. You broke it not by rage, but by rest. You refused to pour into a container riddled with holes. And that refusal wasn't rebellion, it was reclamation. The grief they feel now isn't rooted in love, it's rooted in loss of utility. Because what vanished wasn't just a person, it was the steady frequency that kept their storm in check. It was grounding, it was light, it was you. And they never thought you'd leave. Not because they believed in your love, but because they believed in your tolerance. There's a story of Camilla, a woman who spent years holding the emotional weight of her family, the peacekeeper, the fixer, the one who remembered every birthday, resolved every argument, paid quiet debts without thanks. When she stopped calling, they didn't notice. When she stopped showing up, they assumed she'd return. But she had begun her healing in silence. She moved across the country without announcing it. A year later, her absence wasn't just noticed, it was mourned. Not because they missed her warmth, but because they missed her work, her energy, her holding. And by then, the foundation she once upheld had collapsed in her absence. Contrast this with Dominic, a non-profit director who built his organization with authenticity, until he hired an operations manager, Adrian, who constantly belittled his vision, redirected credit, and wore charm like armor. Dominic never responded with hostility. He simply stepped back, handed in his resignation one Monday without a word of blame. Months later, Adrian found himself overwhelmed. Staff left, donors disappeared, meetings fell flat. It wasn't the departure that destroyed the system. It was the realization that Dominic had been the backbone all along, quiet, integral, and impossible to replace. A similar unraveling echoed in the life of Belinda Carlisle, the Grammy-nominated singer who once led the pop band The Go-Go's. At the peak of her career, surrounded by fame, she became the silent center of chaos. Pressured to constantly perform, mediate egos, and carry emotional weight behind the scenes. But after years of masking pain and addiction, she chose sobriety and stepped away from the scene entirely. Her absence didn't just create space, it exposed what had been taken for granted. Years later, in interviews, her bandmates would admit they never realized how much Belinda held everything together until she was gone. Her quiet exit was not collapse, it was healing. And in a world of surface signals, your exit functioned like reverse resonance. In physics, resonance amplifies when two frequencies match. But you, by stepping away, created destructive interference, a silence that cancelled their echo. You didn't have to shout. The emptiness spoke on your behalf, and it shattered the illusion that you were ever dispensable. When bees abandon a hive, it doesn't collapse in thunder. It decays in silence. The buzzing stops, the pollen dries, and the hive, though structurally intact, becomes hollow. That's what they're left with now. The shell of a system held up by someone they thought would never walk away. Have they realized it yet? That the thing they took for granted was the very thing holding them up? That their comfort came at the cost of your exhaustion? That peace was never free? It was paid in silence, in prayers, in invisible labor. And now you are gone. Not in fury, not in shame, but in sovereignty. Isaiah 32:17 declares, "The fruit of that righteousness will be peace. Its effect will be quietness and confidence forever." You have entered that promise. Your withdrawal was your declaration. And it echoes still, not as absence, but as consequence. The rooms where you once stood now hum with questions no distraction can drown. The air feels heavier where your light used to linger. They miscalculated your endurance, and now they live in the arithmetic of your departure. And you reclaimed your rhythm. You didn't just leave, you ascended. They thought they were dulling you, sanding down your edge, dimming your discernment, numbing your knowing. But in their efforts to chip away at your clarity, they forged something sharper. With each distortion of truth, each backhanded compliment laced with agenda, they assumed you were unraveling. What they never anticipated was that every twisted word, every choreographed crisis, every shift in tone became a recorded signal in your internal vault. They were broadcasting patterns, not manipulation. And you? You were listening like a linguist decoding a forgotten dialect. Did they realize they were writing their own undoing in your memory? That what they thought was mental erosion was actually neural reinforcement? They didn't know you were studying them, not in paranoia, but in precision. The field of cognitive behavioral mapping teaches that patterns repeat, not by chance, but by wiring, and you began to wire yourself to observe. Every passive-aggressive tone was logged. Every apology followed by renewed disrespect was time-stamped. Each fake kindness was catalogued like variables in a psychological experiment. Over time, your confusion calcified into coordinates. You no longer wandered, you navigated. Their illusions, once effective like a smoke screen, started to loop. And you learned what all great systems analysts know: repetition reveals structure. Their chaos wasn't random, it was a system. And once you saw the system, you no longer needed confrontation. Illusions don't survive under light. They fade. This was the strategy of Jesus himself. When the Pharisees tried to trap him with clever questions and distorted logic, he never took the bait. Instead, he answered in parables that revealed the flaws in their intent. Luke 20:23 says, "But he perceived their craftiness and said to them, 'Why do you test me?'" Christ didn't react to confusion, he revealed it. You followed that blueprint, not to win an argument, but to outgrow the arena, because their goal was never truth, it was control. And while they thought you were being reshaped by their pressure, you were actually being refined by contrast. Like the way negative photographic film reveals its true image when exposed to light, their darkness revealed your direction. Joaquin, a forensic accountant from Madrid, once found himself repeatedly undermined by a senior director who praised him in public but sabotaged him in private emails. Joaquin didn't lash out, he collected patterns. By the time the company faced a major compliance audit, it was his archive, not accusations, that exposed the manipulation. He wasn't weaponized, he was watchful. And that saved both his career and others beneath him. Eleanor, a trauma counselor, began her practice volunteering in low-income communities. One particular partner at the organization constantly spoke over her in meetings, took credit for her frameworks, and deployed emotional guilt when she asserted herself. Instead of reacting, Elena built her own library of evidence, notes, timestamps, even recordings. Years later, she trained federal response teams in trauma-informed leadership. The partner? Eventually removed, not by retaliation, but by the undeniable silence of those who no longer believed her false charm. Elena never fought. She evolved. And what of those who refused to evolve? Zdeněk Varga, a renowned Slovakian art curator, built influence through flattery and selective cruelty. He praised young artists only to later demand loyalty, sowing confusion and creative paralysis. For years it worked, until one exhibition went silent. No reactions, no attendance, just empty halls. Word had quietly spread, and artists began pulling their work. His tactics, once so effective, had become transparent. The absence was louder than any protest. Zdeněk's control evaporated without confrontation. Nature understands this language. Mimic octopuses adapt to their predators by mirroring their shape, not to imitate, but to survive. And yet those same predators fall victim to their own repetition. What begins as defense turns into intelligence. You weren't playing their game. You were observing the board long enough to recognize it was rigged. Can you feel it now, that you're not who you were when the cycle began? That your capacity to see has turned every attempt to control you into a mirror they can no longer face? Proverbs 4:7 reminds us, wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore, get wisdom, and with all thy getting, get understanding. That's what you've done. You gathered wisdom, not to manipulate, but to mature, not to control, but to clarify. They mistook your silence for submission, your patience for permission, but you never picked up their methods to strike back. You studied them to build boundaries, barriers that don't trap, but protect. Their strings pulled no longer, because you no longer stand on their stage. What emerged from their attempts to shape a pawn was someone who redefined the board itself. They anticipated an explosion, fire, fury, maybe even collapse. Their strategy hinged on the predictable: provoke, destabilize, then claim the fallout as evidence. They designed the blueprint for drama like architects of chaos, carefully engineering moments that should have triggered you. They prepared for your combustion. They waited for the unraveling. But what they received instead was far more unsettling: composure, an atmosphere they couldn't penetrate, a resistance not built on retaliation but on calibration. You didn't combust, you calculated. Every insult, every sideways glance laced with manipulation, every corridor whisper meant to strip your peace. All of it was absorbed and processed, not by your ego, but by your command center. While they operated on impulse, you responded through awareness. Their moves were powered by reactivity, yours by restraint. They expected emotional thermonuclear detonation, but what they encountered was the law of inertia, a body at rest remaining at rest unless acted upon by a force equal in purpose, and they were never your purpose. Their chaos lacked mass in your realm. So you remained, still, intact, unbothered. They didn't understand this kind of strength, the kind forged not in applause but in the furnace of delay. They couldn't comprehend a spirit that chooses not to engage, a will so anchored, so attuned to the frequency of destiny that it recognized distraction not as an offense, but as architecture beneath its notice. Did they ever pause to question why their provocations weakened over time? Why their tactics began to feel recycled, ineffective, even hollow? Did they ask themselves what it means when someone refuses to be drawn into orbit? When they can no longer hijack your nervous system like they once did? They expected you to mirror their instability. Instead, they were met with gravity, silent, symmetrical, and centered. Their chaos begged for audience. You denied them a stage. Proverbs 29:11 says, "A fool vents all his feelings, but a wise man holds them back." You did not withhold truth to suppress it. You held it to temper it, to distill it, to allow time to clarify what emotion might have clouded. They thought you froze. But this was never paralysis. This was restraint. And restraint is not the absence of energy. It is the deliberate redirection of it. In classical physics, this is known as potential energy, the latent force stored in stillness, waiting for divine timing. You weren't hiding. You were harnessing. You weren't shutting down. You were sharpening. You became the still water that carves stone, not through force, but through persistence. Marcellus, a logistics officer for an international relief mission, once faced allegations of incompetence after a convoy delay near a politically unstable border. Internal memos were selectively leaked. His silence was mocked as guilt. But Marcellus documented every communication, logged every timestamp, preserved every voice note. When an independent panel audited the incident, the truth emerged, not through defense, but through design. He didn't fight the noise. He preserved the signal. Teresa, a school counselor in a rural district, was slowly isolated by a colleague who envied her student rapport. Gossip spread. Meetings became colder. Staff alliances shifted. But Teresa didn't address the whispers. She addressed her purpose, her students. When one suicidal teen stood at a school board hearing and said, "She listened when I was invisible," everything changed. Her silence wasn't surrender, it was incubation. And truth, once matured, speaks in thunder. So did you. That same divine restraint governed Christ before Pilate. John 19:9 says, "But Jesus gave him no answer." Not because he lacked words, but because truth does not audition. It doesn't scramble to be believed, it waits. And when it comes, it's not persuasive, it's permanent. Jamil, a former corporate compliance manager, was discredited by a corrupt executive team who feared his integrity. They engineered his demotion using internal narratives and vague accusations. He didn't push back. He archived, filed, encrypted, trusted the law of time. 14 months later, during an audit triggered by an unrelated whistleblower, his documentation became the forensic backbone of the entire case. The executive board was dismantled. Jamil was reinstated, then promoted. Not because he shouted, but because he documented, endured, and discerned. This is what unraveled their plans. Not confrontation, but consistency. Not fire, but formation. You didn't need a microphone. You became a mirror. Their schemes were built like weak bridges, beautiful from a distance, but structurally unsound. Systems theory calls this inconsistency collapse, when networks fall under the weight of their own contradictions. Glaciers, towering, silent, deliberate, move millimeters at a time, yet they can carve entire valleys. You were that glacier, silent, calculated, patient, reshaping the topography of their control without ever announcing your advance. Helena Rios, a European film producer, once manipulated casting meetings to sabotage Inez, a younger actress she quietly resented. Her attacks were covert, suggestions of lateness, whispered doubts about attitude. But Inez kept showing up, early, composed, consistent. And when she won 2 international awards, the gossip collapsed. Because credibility, once visible, renders rumor obsolete. Isaiah 40:31 declares, "But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles." You didn't burn out. You ascended, without spectacle. Like photosynthesis, your growth was silent, but catalytic. Like tectonic plates, your stillness caused quakes no one predicted. Now the truth, fermented in stillness, forged under pressure, has become immovable. They tried to twist it, stretch it, and distract from it, but now it stands, rooted, balanced, bulletproof. They expected a reaction, they received revelation, and now do they finally grasp the magnitude of a truth that didn't chase applause, but anchored reality itself, a truth that didn't force justice, but became it. And you became the evidence that not every storm needs thunder, that not every warrior holds a sword, that some battles are won with closed mouths and open heavens. And from your silence, a legacy is rising, one that will not decay with applause but endure through alignment. Now the silence they once mocked reverberates louder than any confrontation could have. That same stillness they labeled passivity now echoes with presence. Where they once took pride in provoking, now there is only pause. An awareness rising in hindsight, shadowed by recognition. Because what undid them wasn't rage. It was nothing. No revenge, no shouting, no final speech. Just a steady refusal to descend. And that quiet undoing lingers the longest. While they kept circling the same scripts, baiting reactions, you mastered the one thing they never expected to lose to, yourself. You didn't win by controlling others. You won by mastering your own impulse. Proverbs 16:32 says, "He who rules his spirit is better than he who takes a city." You chose internal dominion, and it rewrote every battlefield they tried to create. They thought you were matching their rhythm, adjusting your steps to their performance. But in reality, you had changed the entire stage beneath their feet. Their theatrics played on obsolete terrain. While they raced to harness fast winds and weaponized perception, you were underground, quietly redesigning the very framework. You weren't retreating, you were re-architecting. Your silence wasn't surrender, it was strategic latency, deliberate restraint to allow a stronger design to emerge. In structural engineering, there's a concept known as passive damping, systems built not to resist chaos with force, but to absorb and neutralize it through stillness. That's what your soul did. It absorbed storms without resistance, converting energy into clarity. They mistook your delays for indecision, but each pause was part of a hidden draft. While they sought applause, you were building altars. Zara, a textile designer in Morocco, faced constant plagiarism from a well-connected rival who copied her color schemes and undercut her pricing. Rather than expose her, Zara shifted in silence. She learned sustainable dyeing methods, partnered with ethical cooperatives, and rebranded under a new name. Her rival's factory crumbled when ethical fashion became law. The same silence once dismissed as fear became the seed of legacy. Malcolm, a junior diplomat, was repeatedly sidelined during negotiations by an older ambassador who saw him as inexperienced. Instead of pushing back publicly, Malcolm mastered geopolitical trend analysis and became the lead on a classified trade deal. When the ambassador was dismissed for outdated practices, Malcolm stepped in, not with vengeance but with vision. Their approach was always noisy, loud gestures, sudden moves, obsessed with optics. Yours, structured, evolving, invisible until complete. Every misjudged moment became a pivot point. They kept trying to trap you in reaction, but you were quietly rewriting the rules. By the time they realized it, they weren't outmatched. They were obsolete. Ramiro Estevez, a media executive known for sabotage by flattery, once manipulated young journalists to echo his ideas without credit. He assumed control meant staying center stage, but his team quietly built their own publication. When it launched, readers migrated almost overnight. His voice faded, not from scandal, but from irrelevance. Ramiro had rehearsed control so many times, he never noticed when the audience changed rooms. Even in nature, evolution doesn't announce itself. Cephalopods, like cuttlefish, don't fight predators by attacking. They change the terrain, shifting color, altering posture until the threat passes unaware. That's what you did. You didn't upgrade to defeat them. You evolved to disconnect. You became unreachable, and in doing so, you became untouchable. What use are sparks when there is no fuel? What power does strategy hold when the field it's designed for no longer exists? Now their conflict echoes like someone pounding on a door that isn't there. You didn't simply move on. You built something they'll never touch. Isaiah 54:17 proclaims, "No weapon formed against you shall prosper." Not because the weapons stopped forming, but because they lost the ability to find you. And here's the question that haunts them now. What do you do when the person you tried to break becomes the architect of the world you can no longer enter? They expected you to remain where they last saw you, wounded, responsive, reachable. But while they obsessed over patterns, you rewrote the terrain, and the silence you carried like armor. It became your cathedral. They had their stage polished and waiting, the lights were set, the scripts rehearsed, the rumor mill already warmed up. All they needed was your collapse to begin the show. They were sure you would detonate. That anger would be your currency and disorder your downfall. But the combustion never came. No public explosion, no scandalous rebuttal, just stillness, because your transformation wasn't staged. It wasn't meant for their applause or their judgment. It wasn't a performance, it was a pilgrimage. What they read as evasion was elevation. While they lit matches in every corner hoping for smoke, you were refining blueprints in silence. They wanted a televised breakdown, but what unfolded instead was an invisible resurrection. Isaiah 43:19 says, "Behold, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth, do you not perceive it?" They didn't perceive it because your rebuilding wasn't noisy. It was disciplined, sacred, internal. While they spun narratives to contain you, you were removing the scaffolding that once limited your view. How could they see your breakthrough when they were too busy searching for your breakdown? Every insult hurled became compost, fuel for something richer to take root. You began to understand emotional transmutation, the psychological process of redirecting reactionary energy into constructive evolution. You weren't trying to defend a version of yourself you had already outgrown. You were discovering the one God always intended you to become. Naomi, a single mother in Johannesburg, spent years absorbing criticism from relatives who mocked her decision to study again in her late 30s. She never argued, she just kept attending night school. When she opened a literacy center 3 years later, no one remembered the ridicule. They only saw the fruit. Her success wasn't loud, it was layered. Dorian, a warehouse technician, endured years of mockery from co-workers for refusing after-hour drinking and gossip. They thought he was weak, repressed, but he was building credit, attending coding boot camps online. Now he works for a Fortune 500 company. His former critics now complain about the very system he helps design. And in the public eye, Marcus Mumford, frontman of the band Mumford & Sons, once endured a media whirlwind that twisted his beliefs, relationships, and moments of vulnerability into clickbait controversy. Instead of reacting, he stepped back, took a sabbatical, and poured his silence into solo music, reflecting healing and introspection. He let the media move on without feeding it, and when he returned, it was with strength, clarity, and zero apology. The same silence that was once ridiculed became the sound of endurance. But not everyone knew when to evolve. Dominique Travain, a former executive producer for a major media house, orchestrated the downfall of multiple rising talents by sowing disinformation, leveraging gossip, and using confidential whispers to sever partnerships. It worked for a while, but as patterns emerged and digital receipts surfaced, those same whispers turned into evidence. Dominique's name, once synonymous with creative power, was removed from every project she once helmed. She's now facing civil lawsuits, not from enemies, but from those she thought would never speak. The lotus flower rises through mud, not by attacking it, but by rising above it. Romans 12:2 reminds us, "Be transformed by the renewing of your mind." That renewal didn't happen in public. It happened in silence, in private obedience, in sacred distance. Their whispers now echo in abandoned chambers. Because you didn't just rise, you relocated. The landscape shifted. The metrics changed. Their tools, guilt, shame, distraction, stopped working not because you resisted them, but because you no longer lived where their tactics applied. Do they realize yet that by obsessing over your collapse, they became blind to your construction? In psychology, this is known as frequency dissonance. When one person evolves beyond the wavelength of another and communication no longer connects, you didn't build walls, you changed frequencies. What unsettles them now isn't just that you moved on, it's that they no longer know where you went. You became unreachable, not in arrogance but in ascension. Their sabotage became irrelevant. Their narrative expired. And what they once called weakness now casts a shadow longer than anything they ever built. They mistook your quiet observation for emptiness, for a vacancy of thought. What they didn't see was that your silence was never passive, it was forensic. While they imagined you stuck, frozen, and emotionally unaware, you were running diagnostics on every move, tracing every word, analyzing patterns like a strategist studying fault lines before a quake. They thought they were weaving illusions, but what they were actually doing was offering you access to their entire operating system. You weren't lagging, you were mapping, and in that stillness, your perception sharpened, not out of defense, but out of discipline. In physics, the principle of signal-to-noise ratio teaches that what appears muted in chaos is often the most valuable frequency. That's what you tuned into. They projected confusion, but you refined clarity. They believed they had you surrounded in fog, but the fog didn't blur your vision. It enhanced your instinct. You moved like sonar in the deep, silent, calculating, aware of even the subtlest vibrations. While they operated on impulse, you recorded patterns, tone shifts, behavioral loops, contradiction layering. Every supposed misstep of yours was deliberate energy conservation. Every pause was an intellectual redirection. What looked like retreat was actually cognitive compression, the strategic withholding of response while you internalized the full structure of their play. Ecclesiastes 3:7 says, "A time to be silent and a time to speak." You had already discerned which one this was, not to protect them, but to prepare for your alignment. Juliet, a university admin, was surrounded by colleagues who questioned her value and excluded her from key projects. Rather than push for inclusion, she studied their routines, their inconsistencies, their assumptions. 1 year later, she proposed a system overhaul that saved the institution millions and made her indispensable. She hadn't been on pause, she'd been building leverage. Rafik, a former prison inmate, was underestimated by every employer who glanced at his record. He didn't argue for opportunity. He trained quietly in logistics, used YouTube to learn analytics, and began consulting small businesses for cash. When one of his clients went national, Rafik was offered equity, not because he demanded it, but because he'd made himself undeniable. And even in public life, Leila Slimani, the French-Moroccan author and diplomat, once received scorn for her unconventional critiques of national identity and intimacy. Rather than debate pundits, she wrote fiction, layered, disturbing, revelatory. Those who dismissed her as irrelevant were later quoting her. Her restraint wasn't silence, it was strategy. Meanwhile, Anton Virelli, a notorious fashion mogul, mocked younger creatives for their minimalism and lack of drama. He controlled with loudness, flamboyant decisions, shocking PR stunts. But while he mocked stillness, a new wave emerged beneath him. Quiet, focused, intentional. When investors pivoted, he realized too late that style had shifted without him. His empire dissolved not from protest, but from evaporation. The deep ocean current moves without splash or surface display, yet it reshapes coastlines, shifts climates, and redistributes life across the planet. You moved the same way, beneath their awareness, but with unstoppable influence. They couldn't trace your movement because the power wasn't above, it was below, where real change always begins. What they dismissed as hesitation was layered discernment. What they saw as blank stares were neurons tracing behavioral architecture. You weren't reacting, you were reading. And now they feel the shift. Have they figured it out yet, that the moment you stopped reacting was the moment you started leading? Proverbs 18:13 warns, "He who answers a matter before he hears it, it is folly and shame to him." They answered before listening. You listened without answering. That's why you saw everything, and they still ask, "What happened?" You didn't miss the game. You waited until it showed you every card. And when it did, you no longer needed to play. You didn't confront the performers. You let the stage collapse. They approached you with predictable moves, linear, mechanical, rigid, as if the soul could be mapped by cause and effect. They relied on a sequence: trigger, wait, manipulate, win. That was their entire architecture, a house of mirrors reflecting only ego. But you weren't even playing on their axis. You were tuned to something far beyond behavioral reflex. They moved in formulas. You moved in frequency. They couldn't perceive the shift because you were no longer reacting. You were responding from resonance. In music theory, there's a concept called harmonic convergence. When two or more frequencies align so precisely, they amplify each other into something transcendent. That's what your rhythm became, not a pattern, a presence. While they worked the surface, crafting outcomes from noise, staging performances, they didn't realize your process was subterranean. Their scripts demanded visibility. Yours required invisibility until complete. What they assumed was passivity was calibration. What they read as delay was divine timing. Isaiah 28:16 says, "Behold, I lay in Zion a sure foundation. He who believes will not act hastily." You didn't rush because your outcome wasn't rooted in approval. You moved from discernment, not from trying to prove, but from knowing. They mistook your rhythm for hesitation, but you were moving to a symphony they were never invited to hear. Sophia, a midwife in a rural village, was ridiculed by a new doctor who dismissed her methods as outdated. He used his title to override her judgment, pushed for interventions she knew were unnecessary, but she didn't argue. She kept practicing. When a complicated birth occurred, it was Sophia's technique, not his, that saved both mother and child. The doctor later transferred, quietly. Sophia never demanded credit, but her authority, earned in silence, became unshakable. Noah, a graphic designer, was repeatedly passed over for promotions in a startup dominated by louder personalities. They thought his quiet nature meant he had no vision. What they didn't see was that Noah was documenting every system flaw, every inefficiency. When the company restructured, his redesigned proposal became the blueprint. He didn't take space, he made space, with mastery. Meanwhile, Chiwetel Ejiofor, acclaimed actor and director, has often operated beneath the radar of Hollywood spectacle. While others marketed noise, he built a body of work infused with weight, subtlety, and clarity. When The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind debuted, the world realized he had been constructing legacy, not seeking attention. His vision wasn't loud, but it was lasting. The same can't be said for Marta Valles, a branding executive known for building her reputation on quick wins and strategic shade. She used manipulation to climb walls, pitting peers against each other, staging meltdowns to shift blame. But her urgency couldn't outrun her instability. When an internal audit revealed mismanagement, the collapse wasn't dramatic, it was mathematical. No one fought her, they just stopped defending her. The silence around her became the evidence. Subterranean rivers run deep beneath the ground, unseen, unmapped, but powerful enough to nourish entire regions. They do not compete with surface streams. They sustain silently. While floods erode and rain evaporates, these deep currents persist, adapting beneath shifting layers. That's how you moved, below perception, beneath expectation. Unseen but essential, you weren't reacting to the elements, you were rerouting life. They couldn't understand why their tactics wore thin, why the old ways stopped working, because their energy was built on control and yours was built on congruence. Their moves became echoes, predictable, hollow. You'd already transitioned from defense to design? Do they realize now that your victory wasn't loud because it was never about them? That you didn't walk away? You ascended to a plane where their game no longer applies? Proverbs 24:3-4 tells us, "By wisdom a house is built, and through understanding it is established. Through knowledge its rooms are filled with rare and beautiful treasures." That's what you've done. You built a structure invisible to those obsessed with spotlight. Your silence wasn't weakness, it was a stronghold. They now watch what they built crack, because your absence removed the only thing holding it together, not because you pushed it over, but because it couldn't stand without the weight of your restraint. You never tried to win their game, you dissolved the board. And now they stand at doors permanently closed, baffled by locks designed for keys they never bothered to seek. They mistook your calm for surrender, your silence for defeat, your stillness for absence. What they never grasped was that you were not frozen, you were faithful. You weren't ignoring what was unfolding. You were simply letting consequence arrive without interference. Because true wisdom knows when to act, and when to allow truth to do what fire cannot, refine through reality. Galatians 6:7 says, "Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. A man reaps what he sows." You didn't need to chase correction. You let cause and effect deliver clarity. While they rushed to control optics and manufacture perception, you stepped back. Not in fear, but in foresight. Not because you didn't see what was happening, but because you saw too much. Their strategies relied on noise. Yours relied on natural law. Every illusion they spun around you only wrapped tighter around them. You let their story continue because you knew how it would end. That's not powerlessness. That's higher calculus. You weren't trying to win their game. You were redesigning the entire terrain beneath it. Emilia, a mental health coordinator at a large tech firm, was gaslit for months by a manager who belittled her input but stole her frameworks. She said nothing, but she documented everything. When corporate asked for wellness data, her compiled models revealed the manager's negligence without accusation. The same silence once called weakness became evidence that reshaped policy. Malik, a maintenance supervisor at a city hospital, was targeted by co-workers who envied his rapport with staff. They filed baseless complaints. Instead of reacting, he kept tending to every leak, every call. 6 months later, an internal audit revealed their misconduct and praised Malik's performance. He wasn't defending himself. He was letting truth surface. And in the public eye, Denzel Washington, one of the most respected actors of his generation, has long been known for his refusal to play into Hollywood chaos. While others chased headlines, he chose reverence. He often says, "Ease is a greater threat to progress than hardship." His career is a testament to silent alignment, decades of depth without spectacle. While drama swirled around him, Denzel stayed anchored. Now the culture circles him for substance, not scandal. By contrast, Genevieve Cross, a celebrity PR agent, made her reputation spinning false stories and staging scandals to control public narratives. She thought she could bury rising influences by manipulating headlines. But when her tactics were exposed in leaked correspondence, clients withdrew overnight. Her name, once whispered with awe, became synonymous with betrayal, not because someone fought her, but because her own pattern revealed itself. Even in nature, coral reefs build slowly, imperceptibly, layer by layer. They don't defend themselves when the waters grow cloudy. They endure, absorb, and reshape the ecosystem over decades. That's how your growth unfolded. Not as spectacle, but as structure. Their urgency ran out of oxygen in your atmosphere. Their illusions collapsed not because you destroyed them, but because you simply left the room. Did they ever wonder why you no longer showed up to the same battlefields? Why your silence didn't scream? It simply shifted gravity. Psalm 37:7 urges, "Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret when people succeed in their ways." You lived this. You didn't argue with outcomes. You waited for revelation. And when the fog cleared, the landscape had changed entirely. They expected resistance. You gave them none. They expected a fight. You gave them distance. And in that distance, their story fell apart, because their control only worked when you stayed close enough to be affected. But you had already migrated, emotionally, spiritually, structurally, to somewhere they couldn't follow. Now they sit in the aftermath of their own design, staring at a blueprint that no longer matches the house they're trapped inside. While they focused on sealing doors, you were walking through new ones they never saw. The trap they built was never yours. It was always a mirror. Do they know now that you never had to win their game? That your strategy wasn't victory, it was transcendence. You let the ground shift under their assumptions. You let time reveal character. You let heaven vindicate what your voice never had to explain. You didn't bury them. You rooted elsewhere, quietly, deeply, permanently. They weren't watching out of compassion. They were spectating, waiting for a collapse loud enough to confirm their suspicions. Every quiet moment, every pause, every breath you took outside their frame was treated like a crack in your foundation. They weren't praying for your healing. They were betting on your unraveling. They didn't want restoration. They wanted entertainment. They expected the fall to be dramatic. Tears, tantrums, chaos. A breakdown worthy of gossip, something they could screenshot and say, "I told you." But you gave them nothing. No collapse, no confession, just distance. And in that distance, you found the only thing they never bothered to look for: clarity. You didn't retreat in fear. You withdrew for reconstruction. What they saw as disappearance was divine architecture, like scaffolding around a temple being rebuilt. Your absence was never abandonment. It was protection. While they measured your silence as weakness, you were rewiring your soul. Isaiah 30:15 says, "In quietness and trust is your strength." You lived that verse, not in theory, in process. Behind doors no one knocked on, you did the work they didn't believe you had the strength to do. You sat with your pain without projecting it. You uprooted trauma without needing an audience. That is transformation. Neural plasticity, the scientific term for the brain's ability to rewire itself after trauma, doesn't need permission. It needs intention. That's what you chose. They thought silence was avoidance. But you were healing your architecture from the inside out. Jared, a college dropout who'd struggled with addiction and depression, spent 2 years off the radar. Friends assumed relapse. But he was working at a mechanic shop by day, studying quietly at night. When he launched his own mobile car service at 26, the same people who doubted him stood in awe of his resilience. Not because he explained himself, but because he became undeniable. Roslyn, a youth minister, was publicly shamed for her association with a scandal in her church, though she was uninvolved. Instead of defending herself in a storm of accusation, she resigned. Privately, she pursued seminary, counseled survivors, and built an underground women's discipleship network. 2 years later, the church crumbled under its own corruption. But Rosalind? She had already planted something that couldn't be shaken. And in the public sphere, Simone Biles, Olympic gymnast, was harshly judged when she stepped back from the Tokyo Games, citing mental health. The world expected breakdown or justification. She gave neither. She didn't perform pain for consumption. She chose sacred pause. And when she returned, it wasn't to prove strength. It was to demonstrate that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it resets. By contrast, Dion Rallis, a popular online life coach, built an empire on motivational sound bites, but belittled peers behind closed doors. He mocked vulnerability while selling fake authenticity. When his private messages leaked exposing manipulation, misogyny, and branding theft, his audience vanished, not because of an attack, but because the lie couldn't withstand silence. The house he built on image had no frame. Nature knows this too. Lava tubes deep beneath volcanic ranges carry fire silently across vast distances. By the time anyone above notices the eruption, the transformation underneath has already carved new terrain. You moved like that, quiet, molten, reshaping the ground beneath those who assumed you were standing still. They thought you needed visibility to heal, but you healed without their applause. They waited for you to bleed publicly, but you let heaven suture you in secret. You didn't respond with rage, you responded with rebirth. Did they ever realize that by the time they looked up to witness the collapse, you'd already rebuilt on higher ground? Psalm 34 verse 5 says, "Those who look to him are radiant, their faces are never covered with shame." You didn't need to expose your wounds to prove healing. The glow was enough. The way you returned, not angry, not bitter, but balanced, made the storm irrelevant. Now they're left retracing echoes, analyzing silence, searching for proof of a fall that never came. And here's the question that stings most. What do you do when someone outgrows the storyline you wrote for them? You didn't fight to reclaim your name. You let time make the edits. You didn't shout to change the narrative. And now, you've already walked into chapters they'll never be invited to read. And now, beloved chosen one, I invite you to take a breath, not with your lungs, but with your soul, because what's been revealed here isn't just a message, it's a moment of realignment. Heaven is hovering close. The same presence that orchestrated this collision is inviting you to sit for a while and respond. Let us pray. Lord of divine assignments, you who speak through silence and move through collisions, thank you for the mystery of alignment. Thank you for trusting me with a soul so fragile, so hidden, and yet so holy. I didn't always understand the why. I still don't. But something in my spirit remembers the assignment I accepted before I took my first breath. You saw their fall, and you saw my ache. You wove us together, not for perfection, but for purpose. Not to rescue from ego, but to reflect your redemption. And now I surrender all my questions. I surrender the exhaustion. I surrender the weight of trying to carry a soul you only asked me to witness. Heal what I could not touch. Redeem what I could only cradle. Show me what you're doing behind the veil, because I choose to trust you even when the mission hurts. If this soul was a mirror, help me see the parts of myself I've refused to love. And if this mission was the key to unlocking my own restoration, let your truth wash over me like the rivers you promised in dry places. Isaiah 43:19. Cover the one I was sent to. Whether they rise or fall again, may your mercy chase them farther than my presence ever could. May your angels stand guard where my words cannot reach. And may I never confuse silence with failure. May I never confuse letting go with abandoning, because what is sown in obedience will be reaped in glory. Thank you for the honor of being chosen. I give you my compassion, my memories, and this soul I carried, for they were never mine to keep, only to steward. In Jesus' name, amen. And now, beloved chosen one, look around, the board is quiet. The pieces they scattered in arrogance lie still, and the hand that moved last was heaven's, through you, not with noise, not with spectacle, but with divine precision, birthed from stillness. The silence they mocked became the very frequency where God whispered your next steps. The restraint they misjudged became the sword they never saw coming. And while they kept counting your silence as loss, heaven was counting it as strategy. You didn't win by shouting, you won by aligning. Not one tear, not one retreat, not one withheld word was wasted. Every moment was planting, every sigh was strategy. And now heaven echoes across realms. Checkmate. Because what they tried to destroy only deepened your anointing. So if this word stirred something deep within you, if it felt like confirmation, like revelation, or like a mirror held to your spirit, I invite you to step further. Join me on my YouTube channel, Grateful to God, where messages like this continue to ignite the fire within the chosen ones. There are more prophetic words, more revelations, more healing, and more divine wisdom waiting for you. Don't forget to like, share, comment, 777 to say Amen, and most importantly, subscribe to stay connected as we walk this holy path together. To everyone who has supported, whether you clicked super thanks or simply listened in silence, I see you, I thank you, and heaven does too. Your presence here is not small. It's part of something eternal. May the same God who silenced your accusers lift your name in unexpected places. May your strength be renewed like the eagle, your discernment sharpened like a double-edged sword, and your peace overflow like a river that cannot be dammed. The war was never about destroying you. It was about revealing you. And now, it is revealed. Checkmate, child of God, you held your peace, and heaven made the final move. Chosen one, they didn't expect you to last this long. Not with a heart that feels everything, not with a soul that still believes in goodness, even after betrayal. They thought your tenderness would break you. They assumed your compassion would undo you. But here you are, still standing, still soft, still full of holy fire. What they failed to understand is that softness is not surrender. It is sacred strength wrapped in silence. And now, even your enemies are admitting what they once mocked. You've got mad heart. They tried to bury your name under mockery, but couldn't drown your spirit. You didn't yell to prove your worth. You whispered truth into dark places and watched it echo louder than their applause ever could. They wanted you bitter, but you stayed blessed. They wanted you broken, but you stayed open. You weren't trying to be seen. You were just trying to stay aligned. And somehow, in the process of staying true, the whole narrative changed. So, what kind of power turns private obedience into public honor without a single word? You never needed revenge to be relevant. You didn't retaliate. You rebuilt. You didn't scheme. You surrendered. And now, without lifting a finger, the same voices that once doubted you are repeating your words, quoting your peace, mimicking your posture. Why are the very ones who distanced themselves from you now drawn to your silence? There is something divine in the way your heart refused to harden, something sacred about how you held your boundaries without losing your beauty. They can't explain it, but they feel it. So if this word is piercing through your spirit, if you feel the shift that's been happening in your life, where the roles are reversing and the room is watching, comment 777 right now. You're not just surviving, you're being revealed. And to everyone who stood with this message, through your presence, your comments, your super thanks, your silent amens, thank you. You are not just supporters, you are witnesses to a divine reversal. But can we pause and ask, what kind of refining produces a heart so unshakable that even slander can't stain it? You didn't just get through, you grew deeper. You didn't lose your tenderness, You mastered your boundaries. And now, your life has become the very proof that the anointing cannot be destroyed, only delayed. Could it be that the very suffering you went through was heaven's strategy to reveal the quality of your character? Maybe this was never about silencing you, but setting the stage for your heart to be seen in full light. Chosen one, this isn't just a shift, it's a holy unveiling, and you're about to see why your heart wasn't a flaw, it was the key. The very thing they underestimated is now the very thing God is exalting. Get ready. Because what they feared about you is finally being confirmed, and this is just the beginning. God's chosen ones, even your enemies. Say it now, you've got mad heart. They said it behind your back at first, whispers laced with disbelief, then laced with fear. That one's got mad heart. Not madness born of chaos, but a fearlessness they couldn't comprehend. While others bowed quickly to the demands of a corrupt, ever-tightening system, you stood your ground like a mountain that cannot be moved. When your friends traded their convictions for convenience and your co-workers compromised truth for applause, you, God's chosen one, walked the narrow path with fire in your bones. What kind of person still speaks of holiness in a generation addicted to noise? Who dares resist a system that demands not just silence but worship? Your answer has never changed. I'm sold out to the Lord. You didn't come to flirt with righteousness, you came to live it. And that decision, though it cost you comfort, brought you clarity. Like Daniel in Babylon, you refused to defile yourself with the king's delicacies. While the empire ate, drank, and bowed, Daniel remained resolved, Daniel 1:8. And so did you. Have you noticed how the pressure never truly lets up, only shifts form? Why do they care so much that you won't play their game? Unless your refusal exposes something in them they'd rather keep hidden. This world, like the matrix it imitates, doesn't ask for your opinion. It demands your allegiance. It doesn't offer suggestions. It issues commands. It tells you what to wear, who to follow, what to desire, and who to become. Every system around you is structured to reward conformity and punish conscience. Promotions are given not for faithfulness, but for compliance. Relationships are brokered not for love, but for leverage. Entire lives are spent building towers that reach the sky, but collapse at the whisper of God's wind. And yet you drew a line that cannot be erased, not in arrogance, but in divine defiance. No system on this earth will make me bow, you said, not with your lips only, but with your entire life. And like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you meant every word. The furnace may be 7 times hotter now, but so is your resolve. Even if he does not deliver us, they declared, we will not bow. Daniel 3:18. Does your refusal to bend ignite the furnace in others? Why does your peace seem to provoke their panic? Why does your clarity make them feel exposed? Pope Benedict XVI once said, the world offers you comfort, but you were not made for comfort. You were made for greatness. And isn't that exactly what you've come to understand? You weren't born to blend in. You were born to burn. Holy, pure, unapologetically devoted to the one who called you. While others climbed ladders built by compromise, you built altars. While others chased after applause, you chased after presence. In a small village tucked into the hills of northern Italy, a young woman named Rosalia once stood before a panel of local officials demanding she abandon her faith to gain access to a scholarship. She looked each one of them in the eye and said, if gaining the world requires me to lose God, then I choose poverty with purity. That one act shut every mouth in the room. She never got the scholarship, but she gained something they would never understand: spiritual territory. You don't need a crowd to confirm your calling. You don't need applause to verify your assignment. What if the isolation was confirmation, not punishment? What if their rejection was a sign that your oil can't be bought or bribed? What if their confusion about your courage is the evidence that heaven is backing you in ways the world cannot measure? Imagine a lion walking calmly through a burning field, not because it's immune to fire, but because it knows who ignited it. That's the kind of calm, commanding authority you carry. You don't fight with noise. You conquer with stillness. And this boldness, it's not bravado. It's blood-bought. You didn't inherit it from the world. You were resurrected into it by the Spirit. So now the system is watching, whispering, reacting, but it's too late. You've already chosen. This is not an experiment. This is your consecration. And no matter how they threaten, no matter what they try, you've made your declaration clear. This is my life, and I will not conform. While the world runs in circles chasing temporary crowns, promotions, applause, titles that vanish like smoke, you chose something radically different. Not because you lacked ambition, but because your ambition was anchored in eternity. You walked away from stages built by ego and embraced altars built by obedience. Others called it foolish. They shook their heads and whispered, "She's wasting her potential. He's throwing away his future." They looked at your choices and couldn't find a box to put them in. But what if the box was always too small for someone built for glory? They don't understand how someone so capable could choose a life so countercultural. How can someone with such gifts turn down what everyone else is fighting to have? Why would you say no to the comfort they crave, the status they idolize, the perks they scheme for? What kind of person walks away from the table everyone else is dying to sit at? You do, God's chosen one, because you're not just choosing simplicity, you're choosing surrender. You're not just rejecting excess, you're embracing divine order. And the ripple effect of your defiance is beginning to disturb the waters. People who once scoffed are now silent. Eyes that once rolled are now watching closely. They may not say it out loud, but your resistance is making them wonder, what if they're right? What if I'm the one settling? What if the way I've built my life is actually the lie? One woman, known today as one of the boldest freedom fighters of the 20th century, lived this kind of rebellion long before it was popular. Corrie ten Boom, a Dutch watchmaker and devout Christian, hid Jews in her home during the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands. People told her she was wasting her life, putting herself and her family in danger, but she chose obedience over safety. She was arrested, beaten, and sent to a concentration camp. Yet her story didn't end in defeat. It became a global testimony of faith under fire. "Never be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God," she once said. And now her courage continues to ignite hearts just like yours. As your light grows stronger, the system grows more nervous. You're not just an individual anymore. You've become a mirror. You're showing people what's possible when obedience becomes more important than optics. You're reminding others of what it looks like when heaven defines identity, not headlines. And that makes you a threat to the status quo, to the lie, to the illusion that submission to the system is the only way to survive. There's James, a young man in a mid-sized city who walked away from a six-figure marketing job because the company he worked for manipulated public trust through deceptive advertising. His colleagues mocked him, friends distanced themselves, even his own father warned him, "You'll regret this." But a year later, he launched a small ethical branding firm rooted in kingdom principles. He now mentors others on how to build with clean hands. And some of the very people who mocked him are now his clients. This is the cost of conviction, and it's not cheap. Your life has become a living parable. And just like the prophet Elijah, who stood alone on Mount Carmel in a showdown with 450 prophets of Baal, you've been summoned into a confrontation that reveals whose God truly answers by fire. 1 Kings 18:36-39. You didn't ask for the spotlight. You didn't seek to provoke. But your refusal to bow has done what your words never could. It exposed the emptiness of their idols. And just like Elijah, just like Daniel, just like Jesus himself, your faithfulness has put you on the radar. The authorities are no longer ignoring you. The system has moved from passive resistance to targeted disruption. Why do you think the pressure has intensified lately? Why do you sense eyes on you, even when you're alone? Why are doors closing that were once open? And why are unfamiliar voices now whispering threats? Could it be that your spiritual weight has finally registered in the invisible realm? Your dedication carries consequences, but also covenant. Yes, you've been noticed. Yes, you've been singled out. But you're not alone. You're surrounded, covered, kept. The very God who shut the mouths of lions for Daniel is preparing to showcase his power in your story too. You've been arrested, not with metal cuffs, but with spiritual constraints more suffocating than any cell. You're not behind physical bars, yet it feels like you've been caged by shadows, surrounded on every side by agents of darkness who have studied your patterns, tracked your rhythms, and waited for the precise moment to strike. Nothing about this was random. The snare was calculated. The setting was staged. Every detail was methodically designed to force a collision between your convictions and your circumstances. Can you feel the tension rising like a storm just before the heavens split? Can you sense that what you're in right now isn't just trouble? It's a spiritual trap built to crush your identity. This is your lion's den. Not the one of folklore or stained glass windows, but the kind where your soul is tested in silence and your spirit is stalked by unseen jaws. The enemies that encircle you aren't just physical. They're spiritual, psychological, systemic, and they're loud. They don't whisper, they roar. Like lions circling Daniel, their breath is hot, their growls unrelenting. The darkness feels deeper than usual, the voices sharper. You look around, and it seems every exit has been sealed, every light extinguished, every prayer met with delay. Why does God allow it to get this dark before his deliverance comes? Why do you feel most forgotten right before the miracle? The enemy has pulled out every weapon: emotional sabotage, financial warfare, relational betrayal, attacks in your sleep, assaults on your reputation. The pressure is not accidental, it's engineered. They want to see what you're made of when the applause is gone, when the support system is silent, and when the miracles feel delayed. Have you noticed how the enemy doesn't waste his biggest weapons on casual believers? Why would he come this hard unless you were carrying something holy? Remember Job? A righteous man singled out for divine testing. Satan said to God, "Stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." Job 1:11. And so began the avalanche, the loss, the sickness, the betrayal. But what the enemy didn't calculate was that Job's faith wasn't a performance. It was a covenant, and so is yours. The enemy is in your face now, loud and vicious. He's shouting, mocking, claiming dominance. "I can destroy you. I can humiliate you. I can take everything," the voices echo. But can he really? Does the threat of destruction override the authority of the God who holds your breath? Who told him he could touch what God has sealed? Why does the enemy act as if he owns you when heaven has already bought you? Cardinal Joseph Mincenti, the Archbishop of Esztergom and a Hungarian symbol of resistance, stood unwavering in his faith when communist authorities arrested, tortured, and imprisoned him for opposing their godless regime. Despite severe physical and mental abuse, he never recanted. Years later, he emerged not as a broken man, but as a beacon of moral courage. His silence in solitary confinement echoed louder than the propaganda of his captors. And his legacy now lives on in the hearts of those who understand that suffering for righteousness is not defeat, it's divine distinction. A young woman named Lena once worked in a medical facility run by unethical executives. When she discovered that the hospital was covering up fatal malpractice cases, she reported it. Within weeks, she was isolated, accused of insubordination, and dragged into a smear campaign that threatened her career. But she stood firm, saying, "If silence protects death, then I choose truth, even if it costs me my name." Years later, several patients' families found justice because of her courage. And now, here you are. You feel the lions breathing on your neck. You hear their snarls. You see the spectators leaning in to watch. But what they don't realize is that what's surrounding you is not stronger than what's inside you. Do they know your faith was forged in fire? Do they understand that what looks like isolation is actually insulation? Do they know your spirit has been battle-tested in silence long before this moment ever came? Picture a glacier breaking through the surface of the ocean. Only a fraction is visible above the waves, but beneath the water is a massive, immovable structure that no storm can move. That's you. They see the surface, but they don't see the depth. They hear your silence and mistake it for surrender. But deep within, your spirit is holding the line. You are not just under attack, you are under preservation. The den may be sealed, but heaven's decree is louder. The lions may roar, but your God shuts mouths. You were not placed here to perish. You were positioned here to prove that no darkness, no threat, no demon has the authority to unwrite what heaven has ordained. They're snarling now, showing their teeth not just to intimidate, but to declare war on your peace. They bear their strength like wolves around a fire, signaling dominance, trying to communicate one thing loud and clear. Resistance is pointless. Surrender is the only way out. Their movements are calculated. The expressions on their faces are rehearsed. The threats are designed to sound absolute. Why else would they be repeating the same message from different mouths? We own this. We own you. Lay down your weapons or be crushed. But the real battle isn't in their growls. It's in the psychological warfare being waged in the unseen. They know exactly where your pressure points are. They've done their research and their strategy is ruthless. They're not just targeting your surroundings, they're probing your soul. They go after your relationships to isolate you, your reputation to shame you, your resources to weaken you, and your resolve to fracture your spirit. The attack doesn't come from one side, it's a multi-directional siege. Have you noticed how the pressure is always timed perfectly with your most vulnerable moments? Why is it that the moment you start to rise, the arrows come from angles you didn't even know existed? But even in the middle of this chaos, there's a voice inside you, deep, ancient, eternal, that refuses to bow. It whispers something that doesn't match your surroundings. While everything around you is shouting panic, this voice is still. It says, "This is all a show. This isn't what it appears to be. This is a scope, a coordinated illusion crafted to manipulate how you see, how you feel, how you respond." The goal isn't just to hurt you. It's to deceive you, to seduce your mind into interpreting temporary shadows as permanent realities. This tactic isn't new. In 2 Kings 6:15-17, the prophet Elisha's servant panicked when he saw enemy armies surrounding the city. But Elisha prayed, "Open his eyes, Lord, so that he may see." And suddenly, the servant saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire, heaven's army already in place. What if that's true for you too? What if what surrounds you in the natural is being outnumbered in the spiritual? C.S. Lewis, the British author and theologian, once wrote, "The tyranny of a thing is not in its existence, but in its perceived inevitability." That's what this war is trying to do, make fear seem inevitable. Make compromise feel logical. Make surrender look like survival. But what if you've already been given the sight to see beyond it? A man named Ezra, a former intelligence officer turned pastor, once recounted how high-level interrogators break prisoners, not by pain, but by illusion. They simulate hopelessness, false time cues, fake executions, planted betrayals. And yet, he said the strongest prisoners were those who refused to accept the illusion as truth. The moment you believe the lie, he said, you start cooperating with your captors without realizing it. And yet here you are, eyes wide open. They might be roaring louder, but your discernment is sharper. They want you to collapse under smoke and mirrors, but something in you is cutting through the fog like a sword of light. You're not reacting with panic anymore. You're perceiving with clarity. You've come to understand that the enemy's greatest power is not in what he actually does to you, but in what he convinces you to do to yourself. There's a young single mother named Mariam who once faced a barrage of legal threats and public humiliation when her former employer tried to silence her whistleblowing. She was told, "You'll lose your kids, you'll lose your name, you'll lose everything." But instead of folding, she walked into court with nothing but a Bible and her conviction. The judge, after reviewing the evidence, threw out the accusations and said, "Truth defends itself." What she thought would end her became her unveiling. Imagine a desert mirage shimmering in the heat, appearing solid but vanishing as you draw near. That's the nature of this attack. From afar, it looks unstoppable, but as your faith brings you closer to it, you begin to see it was only smoke, only fear dressed up in costume. They might have some power in the natural realm, but they cannot touch your anointing. They cannot corrupt your calling. They cannot revoke what heaven has sealed. So, Stian, don't just survive the illusion. Dismantle it. Let your clarity become a weapon. Let your stillness become defiance. Because now you know the truth. The lions may show their teeth, but they have no authority over your soul. And heaven has already declared, "No weapon formed against you shall prosper." Isaiah 54:17. The lions are roaring for dramatic effect, but they're actors in a performance they can't finish. The volume is high, the gestures are fierce, but the power behind their threats, it's hollow. They snarl and pace like executioners, but the chains they rattle are illusions. The intimidation is loud, but not lawful. It shakes the flesh, but it cannot reach your covenant. And yes, you probably flinched. Who wouldn't? Scripture doesn't sanitize the terror. Even Daniel, the seasoned prophet who had seen visions of empires rising and falling, was human. Imagine standing in that stone pit, darkness pressing in, and hearing the growls grow closer. The fear wasn't fake, but faith isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to stand anyway. And now you stand in your own den. The scent of fear may linger in the air, but so does something stronger, defiance born of devotion. You can feel your body reacting, heart pounding, breath shallow, mind racing. But your spirit is steady. The voice within says, "They can roar, but they can't reach me." Your heart has become the battlefield. The pressure is real, but so is the power within you. This isn't a test of performance. It's a test of posture. In 1 Peter 1:7 it says, "These trials will show that your faith is genuine. It is being tested as fire tests and purifies gold." This moment isn't punishment, it's proof. God is allowing this shaking not to expose your weakness, but to display your worth. The spiritual realm is watching, not as spectators of your destruction, but witnesses of your demonstration. Your reaction right now echoes into dimensions far beyond the physical. What kind of spirit still praises under pressure? What kind of heart still worships while the walls close in? Nelson Mandela, once labeled a terrorist by the system he opposed, spent 27 years in prison for refusing to abandon his vision of justice. His captors thought time would break him, but instead of emerging bitter, he emerged refined. "I am the master of my fate," he said. "I am the captain of my soul." That wasn't arrogance, it was the maturity of a man whose suffering had forged clarity. That's the kind of posture you carry now. Not defiance for its own sake, but the resolve of one who knows where their true citizenship lies. In a small town near the border, a middle-aged widow named Selina was falsely accused of a crime after refusing to bribe officials who wanted access to her property. She faced court alone, armed with nothing but her journal, her prayers, and a copy of Psalm 91. Everyone thought she would plead guilty out of fear. Instead, she stood and said, "If this is the price of obedience, then so be it. I won't bend for comfort." The judge was stunned into silence. Within days, the charges were dropped, and the same official who persecuted her was removed for corruption. You've reached a holy threshold. Earthly concerns have lost their grip. Comfort no longer seduces you. Approval doesn't validate you. Success no longer defines you. You've tasted something eternal, and now everything else feels temporary. You're no longer surviving just to keep a reputation. You're living to uphold a revelation. What motivates others no longer moves you. When comfort demanded your compromise, you chose the cross. When reputation asked for your silence, you chose truth. You didn't make this decision out of recklessness, but revelation. This isn't suicidal thinking, it's sacred surrender. Like Paul, who wrote from prison, "To live is Christ, to die is gain." Philippians 1:21. You found the kind of love that redefines loss. What you've discovered is treasure buried so deep that nothing else matters. This is what Jesus meant when he spoke of the kingdom like a pearl of great price, so precious that you'd sell everything just to have it. Matthew 13:45-46. You've tasted the eternal, and now the temporary doesn't tempt you. You've touched something sacred, and now the counterfeit has no allure. Imagine a mountaintop struck by lightning. The tree at the summit is burned, stripped and battered, but still rooted. That's you. The storm hit, the wind howled, the fire came, and yet you're still standing, still rooted in something deeper than fear, deeper than emotion. You've become a thunderproof testimony, and to the darkness that roars and rattles and repeats its threats, your declaration is final. I don't care about the noise. I don't care about your illusions. I care about God, and that's all that will ever matter. You haven't just survived the pressure, you've revealed the gold inside your soul. This kind of defiance doesn't just annoy the system, it dismantles it. The entire structure of fear collapses when it has nothing left to hold over you. Fear is only effective when you're still bargaining with comfort, still clinging to control, still guarding a piece of your life from surrender. But when you've already handed it all over to God, your reputation, your resources, your future, then the enemy is left with an empty arsenal. What can they threaten when you've already died to self? What leverage do they have when your affections no longer anchor you to this world? The boldness pulsing through you didn't come out of nowhere. It's been forged in the quiet, in the unseen, in the little yeses that no one applauded. Each decision to choose trust over trauma, truth over safety, obedience over convenience. Those weren't random. They were divine training grounds. Every small trial was weightlifting for your spirit. What you're walking in now is not accidental. It's earned. Not earned by striving, but by surrender. 2 Corinthians 5:13 reminds us, if we are out of our mind, it is for God. If we are in our right mind, it is for you. Paul understood this holy madness, this sanctified irrationality that confuses the world. You're not insane, you're aligned. You've tapped into something so eternal, so sovereign, so radiant, that ordinary logic doesn't apply to you anymore. You've entered into a divine paradox. The deeper your surrender, the stronger your safety. The more you release, the more you receive. The world calls it foolishness, but heaven calls it faith. Saint Joan of Arc, a young peasant girl with no military training, once led French troops to victory because she claimed God had spoken to her. Burned at the stake for her unwavering belief, she declared in her final moments, "Hold the cross high so I may see it through the flames." History remembers her not as a heretic, but as a prophetess, a martyr, a vessel of divine audacity. Her madness wasn't insanity, it was vision others couldn't bear to see. In the heart of a megacity, a woman named Nadira walked away from a lucrative position in an elite political circle after being asked to manipulate public policy for private gain. She chose to expose the corruption instead. The fallout was instant: smear campaigns, financial ruin, social exile. But Nadira stood unshaken. "God didn't give me this voice to use it for comfort," she said. "He gave it to me to confront injustice." Years later, the very system she exposed began to fall, and some of the same voices that silenced her now quote her in reverence. "Even as the enemies roar, even as the lions prowl, you stand saturated, not in fear, but in glory, saturated in Holy Spirit, saturated in the light of God that no shadow can penetrate. You are not merely protected, you're enveloped. The presence surrounding you is stronger than steel, more impenetrable than armor, and more reliable than any alarm. The atmosphere around you has shifted. The war is still visible, but your victory is already sealed." This is the realm of divine physics, where the invisible governs the visible. What others see as fragility, heaven sees as force. Your stance in surrender has triggered a protective perimeter that no demon can cross. Why? Because you're not standing in your own name, you're standing in His. This isn't self-preservation, it's kingdom representation. Imagine the way lava cools into obsidian. What was once chaotic heat becomes unbreakable stone. That's the transformation happening inside you. From emotional turbulence to spiritual solidity, from reaction to revelation, from flesh to flame. And here's what makes it undeniable. Your protection is not based on how well you fight, but how deeply you've surrendered. It's not about how skilled you are at dodging attacks. It's about how trustworthy God is in shielding the surrendered. The safety you're walking in isn't a product of your strength. It's a product of His character. Psalm 91:4 says, "He will cover you with His feathers, and under His wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness will be your shield and rampart." This is not theory for you, it's reality. You're not reciting promises, you're living in them. The darkness might still shout, but heaven already whispered, "Untouchable." Let's take a moment to honor the ones who don't just walk differently. They carry a weight most people will never understand. These are the chosen, the invisible warriors, cloaked not in status, but in spirit. They see through the noise, feel beneath the surface, and respond to battles that others don't even know exist. These aren't the loud ones. These are the ones who carry sacred silence as a weapon. They are the intercessors in the shadows, the rebuilders of ancient ruins, the keepers of the flame when everyone else is asleep. Their presence shifts atmospheres even when they speak no words. You know who you are. You don't need applause. You've never chased the crowd. While others sought safety in numbers, you chose clarity in isolation. While others built platforms, you built altars. This world may call you strange. Heaven calls you necessary. Your difference isn't dysfunction, it's design. And now, to you, the one still standing, the one the battle tried to break, but heaven reinforced. You are not weak for being tested, you are trusted. When God called you His soldier, He didn't mean you'd wear medals. He meant you'd wear scars. You've been through pain not as punishment, but as preparation. And the strength you carry now didn't come cheaply. It came through war zones that no one else witnessed. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German theologian and pastor, stood against the Nazi regime at the height of its terror. He was imprisoned, interrogated, and eventually executed, yet never once compromised his allegiance to Christ. "When Christ calls a man," he said, "he bids him come and die." His faith wasn't dramatic, it was disciplined. It didn't flinch under evil. It stood, and it still speaks. Outside the public eye, a man named Jalen turned down a high-ranking executive role after learning that the position required him to endorse unethical surveillance practices targeting innocent communities. His friends called it career suicide. He called it spiritual obedience. Years later, he started a non-profit advocating for digital justice, and his story helped shift national conversations around privacy ethics. You, too, have reached a point of no return. The enemy may have thought he could wear you down, but what he didn't expect was the fire in your bones, the holy resolve of someone who has already died to self. You're not afraid of what they can take from you because you've already given it all to God. You've seen too many divine reversals to believe this is the end. You've heard God too clearly in the midnight hour to let fear rewrite the script. Imagine an oak tree on a cliffside, weather-beaten, lightning-scarred, but still standing. Its roots run deeper than its height, and that's why it doesn't fall. That's you. You weren't built to be decorative. You were built to endure. You've survived storms that should have uprooted lesser spirits, and now your shadow offers shelter to those silently watching your stand. 2 Timothy 2:3 says, "Endure hardship with us like a good soldier of Christ Jesus." And that's exactly what you've done. This isn't about proving yourself to God. He already knows. This is about revealing to the world what faith looks like when it's lived, not just preached. This is about showing others that surrender isn't weakness, it's the ultimate strength. So thank you for not quitting when it got unbearable. Thank you for standing when others bowed. Thank you for choosing purity in a culture of compromise. What you've endured wasn't in vain. The heavens saw, the earth felt it, and history will remember it, because God is not just testing you, He is commending you. The unseen realm has fallen silent in reverence. What's unfolding in your life isn't just being observed, it's being documented in eternity. Every breath you take under pressure, every tear you cry without giving up, every moment you stand when it would be easier to flee. It's all being noted by angels who've seen kings rise and empires fall. You are now the battlefield and the spectacle. The heavens are leaning in, and the forces of darkness are seething. Their usual blueprints have failed. Their psychological war manuals are burning. You were supposed to break by now. Demons are bewildered. They've watched thousands collapse under far less. They predicted that fear would override your faith. They were counting on your humanity to override your holiness. But instead of retreating, you've been revealing. Instead of fracturing, you've become fireproof. They expected a collapse. Heaven is witnessing a coronation. The way you're walking through this storm is echoing through realms you can't yet see. Your name, yes, your name, is being spoken in angelic circles. Your response is becoming a case study in obedience. It's not just that you're enduring, it's the way you're enduring. With peace that makes no sense, with joy that's defiant, with clarity that cuts through chaos. The fire hasn't touched you the way they thought it would. The enemy expected ashes. God is revealing gold. Hebrews 12:1 speaks of a great cloud of witnesses watching us run the race. You're in that arena now, not to prove your worth, but to unveil His. Your endurance has turned into a banner. Other believers, some you'll never meet, are gaining courage by watching how you carry this season. Your life is becoming a lighthouse, not because it's easy, but because it's anointed. Corrie 10. Boom, who once hid Jewish families from Nazi forces and was imprisoned in a concentration camp, famously said, "There is no pit so deep that God's love is not deeper still." Her survival didn't just preserve her life. It ignited generations with the knowledge that faith isn't fragile. Neither is yours. What tried to bury you is now broadcasting your boldness. In a rural village battered by corruption and silence, an elderly man named Thomas refused to surrender his land to a cartel-backed development scheme. Threats came, bribes followed, and finally attacks. But he built a chapel with his own hands at the center of the disputed property and prayed there every dawn. When he died, his land was legally preserved as a sanctuary, protected by the very government that once ignored him. His legacy became a refuge for future generations seeking peace. And while demons rage, angels move, not subtly, but decisively. These are not cherubs with harps. These are warriors who once cast Lucifer from heaven. The same celestial hosts who attend the throne of the Most High have now been assigned to your defense. Not because you're elite, but because you're entrusted. Not because you demanded help, but because your surrender summoned it. Imagine the wings of 100,000 stars folding over you, absorbing every threat, every dart, every curse hurled your way. Imagine voices once singing, "Holy, holy, holy," before God, now roaring silence into your enemies' mouths. This isn't poetic language. This is spiritual reality. You are not alone. You never were. What the scope tried to do has utterly failed. The fear campaign didn't just backfire. It detonated the lie that you were ever vulnerable in the first place. What was designed to destroy you has instead deepened your discernment, sharpened your authority, and magnified the presence of God in and around your life. You've become the unexpected threat, the underdog who didn't break, the vessel that wouldn't shatter. Psalm 34:7 says, "The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him and delivers them." That's not just a verse for you, it's your reality. The angelic armies haven't just observed your trial, they've intervened. What was meant to be your tomb has become your testimony. What was meant to be the end is about to be heaven's unveiling. So let the record show you were outnumbered but not overpowered, surrounded but not surrendered. You were targeted but you became a threat. What they meant to silence you only summoned heaven. And now, the roar of lions has been replaced by the whisper of wings. The moment has arrived. This is not speculation. This is not projection. It is divine activation. The time for your release has been declared in heaven, and earth has no choice but to respond. Those who tried to detain you, whether in spirit or circumstance, have lost jurisdiction. The legal accusations in the spirit realm have been struck down. The verdict has shifted in your favor. The sentence has been reversed. The doors once locked have flung wide open, not by force, but by decree. And your release? It's not just personal, it's prophetic. It's God's public demonstration that he still moves mountains, still splits seas, still rescues lions from dens and people from impossible places. What you're walking into is not just a blessing. It is a broadcast. This moment is proof that the God of Daniel is not ancient folklore. He is a living force. Your breakthrough testifies that faith is not a relic of the past. It is the most potent currency in the unseen realm. Isaiah 43:13 says, "No one can deliver out of my hand. When I act, who can reverse it?" That's what's happening now. The impossible has been reclassified as inevitable. What looked like a permanent loss is now an immortal testimony. You are no longer the one condemned. You are the one crowned. The script has flipped, and the final chapter reads like resurrection. In 1955, Rosa Parks, a quiet seamstress with relentless conviction, refused to surrender her bus seat to injustice. That decision birthed a national movement and rewrote history. Her resistance wasn't loud, but it was thunderous in the spirit. She later said, "I was just tired of giving in." Her obedience didn't just spark freedom, it proved that righteousness, when planted in ordinary soil, can still shake systems. Miles away from the headlines, a barista named Leona found herself falsely accused of theft by a regional manager seeking to scapegoat her for internal fraud. Her job was suspended, her reputation stained. Everyone assumed she'd disappear in shame, but instead she stood outside the shop every day with a simple sign, "Truth stands even when I cannot speak." Weeks later, surveillance footage surfaced, vindicating her entirely. She was reinstated and offered the manager's role. She declined. "I only needed my name restored. God did the rest." On the steps of the courtroom, people gathered to predict your collapse, but now they're witnessing your coronation. Those who expected shame are now applauding your deliverance. Their eyes are wide, not just with wonder, but with the realization that what you carry cannot be fabricated. They sense something unshakable, something fierce, something sacred. They came to mock, but they're leaving moved. The way you walked through this fire has revealed the furnace could not change your form. Even those who don't share your faith can't deny your resilience. They may not say, "Amen," but they will say, "Respect," because they saw your suffering and they watched how you handled it. They saw the pressure, and now they see the purity. An oak tree on a cliffside does not apologize for its posture. It does not flinch in the wind. Its roots go deeper than anyone can measure. That is what the world sees in you now, a life grounded so deeply in God that even your enemies have been forced to reassess your strength. The applause wasn't your goal, but it has become the fruit. The same people who once analyzed your silence are now studying your courage. Your example is being passed along. Your name is being spoken in spaces you've never entered. Your story is traveling farther than your feet ever could. Psalm 23:5 proclaims, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies." That table is set, that audience is gathered, and they're watching, some in awe, some in repentance, all in recognition that what you carry isn't performance. It's power, heaven-backed, hell-defying, legacy-defining power. And now your release marks more than a moment. It marks a movement. The lion's roar has been silenced. The accusations have been erased. The miracle has been made manifest. And all they can say now is what angels already knew. You've got mad heart. No one can break you. No one can shut you down. No person, no principality, no structure on this earth or in the atmosphere above it has the authority to intimidate what heaven has fortified. You've crossed into a realm where fear no longer dictates your decisions. The threat that would paralyze others only activates your clarity. People are starting to talk, not out of gossip, but out of awe. Whispers have turned into wide-eyed testimonies. Your name is surfacing in conversations, not because you shouted, but because you stood. What made others panic revealed your peace. Who else can walk through storms with stillness like this? Who keeps their heart unshaken when everything around them is trembling? Who stands in the face of spiritual assault and says, "Do what you must, but I will not bow"? Your boldness is not performative, it's protective. You are not reckless, you are rooted, and people feel it. The only one who could truly shake you is Jesus Christ himself. But he never comes with fear. He comes with fire and love. You belong to him. You've been grafted into the lineage of unbreakables. The King of Kings has placed his spirit within you, and that spirit doesn't flinch. It doesn't fold. That spirit reminds you daily, you are loved, chosen, sealed. This isn't arrogance, it's alignment. Why should the approval of men disturb someone who's already been approved by the throne room? 2 Timothy 1:7 says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind." You've embraced that truth. Even when your flesh tenses and your hands tremble, your spirit remains unmovable. The fear may touch your skin, but it cannot breach your soul. How is it that others feel defeated under lighter pressure, but you grow sharper under fire? What is it about your presence that disrupts the schemes of darkness? In 1963, James Baldwin, a writer, activist, and prophetic voice of his generation, stood unapologetically before national audiences and declared, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." He was bold in the face of institutional hatred, not because he lacked fear, but because he refused to be ruled by it. That same spirit, the one that speaks truth without trembling, is alive in you. People can see it, and they can't unsee it. A high school teacher named Elijah once faced expulsion after refusing to erase a student's poem about prayer from the school's creative writing journal. Told by administrators that religion has no place in public spaces, he simply replied, "Truth has no boundaries." The student's peace was kept. Elijah lost his job, but 2 years later, he founded an online platform for student voices that now mentors thousands in faith-informed writing. He didn't lose influence, he multiplied it. The boldness you've displayed has pierced deeper than anyone expected. It's not just being admired, it's being absorbed. Others are watching how you walk, and something in them is waking up. Believers who were whispering prayers are now declaring them with authority. People who had nearly compromised are stepping back into their calling. Why do you think courage spreads like fire when it's authentic? Why does your consistency seem to activate something ancient in the hearts of those around you? You've become a carrier of fearless faith, the kind of strength that doesn't need to yell to be heard, the kind of clarity that calms chaos, the kind of peace that passes understanding because it doesn't come from circumstance, it comes from covenant. Your example is creating a ripple effect. Your stance has become someone else's inspiration. You didn't ask to lead, but your endurance has made you one. Picture a single ember falling in a forest. It touches dry ground, and suddenly the atmosphere changes. One spark becomes ignition. One spark becomes revival. That's you. Your mad heart isn't just impressive, it's contagious. Your courage is catching. Your boldness is becoming movement. And those who once watched in silence are now stepping into battle, carrying the same fire. You didn't just survive, you sparked awakening. A royal decision has already been made. On the other side of this trial, a king has been waiting, not just out of curiosity, but with divine anticipation. Someone in a seat of influence, a voice of consequence, has been watching your journey with trembling reverence. Not everyone dismissed you. Not everyone scoffed. This king represents divine authority expressed through human structure, watching your trial, not to condemn, but to witness. Could it be? They wondered. Is their God really that powerful? Is this one truly marked by heaven? Will we see a miracle unfold before our eyes? The questions haven't stopped. The king has paced palace corridors the same way the world has paced the sidelines of your suffering. They watched the accusations, the pressure, the silence. They watched how you didn't fold. And now, those in power are beginning to shift from spectators to celebrants. They've seen strength that can't be explained, faith that can't be manipulated, joy that can't be extinguished. What kind of person survives a lion's den and walks out more radiant than before? What kind of spirit refuses bitterness when betrayal was justified? Daniel 6:23 records, "When Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God." The same astonishment that fell upon King Darius when he saw Daniel alive is rising again. The king didn't just observe, he declared, he decreed. And so will those assigned to your destiny. Your survival was never just for you. It was to testify to those in authority that your God is no myth. In 2009, Judge Janine Pirro, a former prosecutor and TV host, was publicly skeptical of religious appeals in legal defenses until she witnessed a falsely accused young woman facing years in prison remain silent and calm through the storm. Janine later confessed on air, "She had a kind of peace I couldn't understand, and I realized faith isn't weakness. It's another kind of law altogether." The woman was acquitted. Her faith didn't make headlines, but it transformed the judge's heart. Authority is watching, and hearts are turning. And now, as you emerge, wounded perhaps in body but untouched in spirit, the king smiles. The celebration waiting on the other side isn't polite, it's legendary. The joy is raw, the relief is loud, the tears in their eyes are real. This isn't just promotion, it's prophetic vindication. Across the country, a man named Raphael once turned down a high-profile entertainment contract after discovering it required him to promote values he no longer aligned with. The industry wrote him off. But months later, a producer who had quietly watched his refusal offered him a better deal: ownership, creative control, and full protection. "I watched how you stood," the producer said, "and I knew you were the one." Raphael didn't chase the throne, but the throne found him faithful. What if the position you're about to receive is not a reward, but a divine placement? What if the offer being prepared isn't about your talent, but about your testimony? What if the door opening has been waiting for the maturity forged in fire? What if this whole time God wasn't just preparing you for influence, but preparing influence for you? Imagine a river carving through stone, not because of force, but because of consistency. Over time, it changes the very shape of the mountain. That's what your endurance has done. It has shaped the atmosphere, shifted minds, created pathways where none existed before. The contract that's being handed to you now is the visible evidence of invisible obedience, and it comes wrapped in something most never attain: trust. Psalm 75, 6-7 reminds us, "No one from the east or the west or from the desert can exalt themselves. It is God who judges. He brings one down, he exalts another." This position isn't man-made, it's heaven-sent, and with it comes a hedge of protection that no slander can penetrate. The ones who mocked will now marvel. The ones who tried to tear you down will now have to salute what you carry. You are being positioned, not just for prestige, but for purpose, not for ego, but for impact. This role carries with it honor, yes, but also insulation, authority, yes, but also sanctuary. And from this new place, your influence will touch lives that were never accessible before. The lions couldn't stop you, the pit couldn't silence you, and now, even your enemies will have to respect what you've become. This is more than restoration, it's redefinition. You aren't just being welcomed back, you're being walked into territory you never dreamed you could occupy. And heaven is declaring, "This one has mad heart," and they're ready for the mantle. Restoration was never about returning to what was. It was always about launching you into what never existed before. This isn't a simple reset, it's a divine recalibration. You're not just getting back what you lost, you're receiving more than you had the capacity to dream. The comeback you're stepping into isn't a replay of the past, it's an upgrade from heaven's storehouse. What if the pain was simply the prerequisite for promotion? What if the resistance was actually a reference point for resurrection? Joel 2:25 declares, "I will restore to you the years that the swarming locust has eaten." But God doesn't just restore time, he restores territory. And when God restores, he doesn't return things as they were. He redeems them to what they were always supposed to become. You thought you were being emptied, but you were actually being reformed. You were being readied to receive not a portion, but overflow. This isn't just vindication, it's elevation. This isn't just about proving you were right. It's about showing the world that God rewards the faithful in ways that rewrite narratives. That trial that looked like a death sentence, it became a diploma. You didn't just survive, you graduated. And now you walk with a spiritual rank that hell recognizes and heaven honors. The test that tried to strip you of faith actually became the forge that purified it. The voices that tried to silence your story only increased its reach. The enemy thought the cage would break you. Instead, it built you. Why is your faith stronger than ever after so much loss? Why does your joy defy logic? Why does your clarity intimidate rooms filled with noise? In Romans 8:37 it says, "In all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us." You didn't just make it out. You came out glowing. You're not just free, you're fire-tested. The type of testing you've endured no longer applies to you. The spiritual maturity you've cultivated has changed your classification in the Spirit. You've entered a covenantal depth that qualifies you for divine access others can't imitate. Viola Davis, an award-winning actress and a survivor of extreme poverty and childhood trauma, once said, "All dreams are within reach. All you have to do is keep moving toward them." But what she rarely mentions publicly is how often her faith anchored her through seasons of instability. It wasn't luck that brought her to the stage. It was perseverance baptized in pain. That same pattern is visible in your life now. The world will call it strength. Heaven calls it obedience. In a remote village, a woman named Naomi worked years to build a small shelter for abandoned girls. When the building was burned down by opposition, many assumed her mission had ended. But instead of quitting, she fasted for 21 days and kept gathering the girls under a nearby tree. News of her persistence reached a global non-profit, which later funded a new facility triple the size of the original. "They tried to erase me," she said, "but fire only refined what God had already spoken." You are now standing in the never again season. Never again will you be treated like an experiment for the enemy's schemes. Never again will your faith be toyed with by the hands of manipulation. You're done with cages. You're done with fear tactics. You've been marked as unshakable. Why would God let you return to systems you've outgrown? Why would he permit the same test again when you've already passed with distinction? You're not just recognized, you're revered. And not because you demanded honor, but because you carried humility. Not because you chased applause, but because you chased presence. The supernatural glow that now surrounds you isn't hype, it's holiness. People can sense it. They don't know how to explain it, but they feel it when you walk in the room. Something about your presence says, "This one has been with God." Visualize the core of the earth, molten, radiant, pressurized. It's hidden from view, yet it fuels everything above it. That's the kind of fire burning in your heart now. It's not emotional hype, it's holy combustion. Your spirit has become a furnace of divine intimacy. You're not stirred by songs, you're ignited by secret place encounters. This isn't religious enthusiasm, it's spiritual transformation. You've become the evidence that intimacy with God produces unshakable identity. And now the recognition is rising. Your faith is not only being acknowledged, it's being imitated. The fire in your soul has become light for others. The boldness in your stance is sparking awakening in hearts that were growing cold. What you carry cannot be learned in textbooks or unlocked through networking. It was forged in fire, received in silence, guarded by surrender. And all of it leads to this one truth. You didn't just survive. You've become proof. Graduation doesn't mean your journey has ended. It means you've been entrusted with more. You're not stepping away from the battlefield. You're stepping into command. What you endured wasn't to disqualify you. It was to promote you. And now heaven is issuing your advancement. The faithfulness you demonstrated when no one was watching is about to be honored where everyone can see. The private integrity you guarded in silence is about to echo in places of influence. Your anointing has been authenticated in the wilderness, and now it will be activated in public spaces. You've entered a spiritual maturity where intimidation doesn't register the same. Fear has lost its grip because love has taken root. You walk with the kind of quiet confidence that turns chaos into calm. What others call courage, you call covenant. You didn't fake peace, you cultivated it. You didn't rehearse bravery, you became it. What kind of person smiles in the face of a threat and walks forward anyway? What kind of soul doesn't bow when systems demand compromise? The only one with the authority to command your trembling is Jesus Christ himself. But he doesn't threaten, he invites. He doesn't rule by fear, he reigns through love. You belong to him, you are his, sealed by his Spirit, anchored by his presence. Romans 8:15 reminds you, you did not receive a spirit of fear, but the spirit of adoption, by whom we cry, Abba, Father. This is where your fearlessness flows from, not ego, but identity, not bravado, but belovedness. The love of God has become your fortress. It doesn't waver when emotions do. It doesn't vanish when the battle intensifies. It remains when everything else feels unstable. 1 John 4:18 says, "Perfect love casts out fear." And that's what has happened. Fear isn't tolerated in your atmosphere anymore because love has taken up full residence. You've reached a place where even if fear taps on the surface of your humanity, it can't infiltrate the foundation of your faith. You know who you are, but more importantly, you know whose you are. What once shook you now sharpens you. What once overwhelmed you now overflows from you as authority. Chadwick Boseman, celebrated actor and man of deep private faith, filmed his most iconic roles while secretly battling cancer. Few knew the pain he carried. But he once said, "When God has something for you, it doesn't matter who stands against it. He will move someone out of the way. He will open a door." His quiet strength, forged in suffering, was not performance, it was power, and it left an imprint that still reverberates, just like the strength you're now known for. In a busy city clinic, a nurse named Adeline was quietly disciplined for praying with a grieving patient. Administrators warned her to stop mixing faith with care, but the patient's family began sharing how Adeline's prayers changed their entire hospital experience. Word spread. Months later, hospital leadership offered her a new role, head of spiritual wellness for terminal care. Adeline didn't fight for recognition. Her faith fought for her. That's the kind of influence you're stepping into now. Not because you chased position, but because your posture attracted promotion. Not because you demanded a platform, but because your perseverance built one. What if the storm wasn't meant to sink you, but to reveal that you've become the storm? Imagine the way tectonic plates shift deep beneath the ocean. Silent, powerful, and unstoppable. That's what has occurred within you. An inner restructuring, a holy realignment, an unshakable confidence that can't be undone by surface turbulence. Your foundation has been reset at the core. This isn't the end of your story. This is the beginning of a new chapter, one where you lead with divine confidence and walk in unshakable assurance of God's protection and purpose. You've been prepared by trial, equipped by fire, and anointed through pain. What you carry now cannot be taught, it had to be lived. And heaven trusted you to live it. The lions tried to devour you, but couldn't. The system tried to break you, but failed. Fear tried to control you, but was cast out. Intimidation tried to mute you, but your voice only grew louder. The pressure tried to bend you, but your spine became steel. The threats tried to make you flee, but your feet stayed planted. And now the world is beginning to understand what heaven has always known. You've got mad heart. Chosen one, let this truth settle into your spirit like fire meeting dry wood. You didn't just survive the storm. You were refined by it. What they tried to shame, God has chosen to showcase. What they labeled as reckless, heaven now calls fearless faith. You've proven that mad heart isn't wild arrogance. It's holy defiance against fear, compromise, and silence. And now, even your enemies can't deny it. You're walking proof of what happens when someone refuses to bow to anything but God. This isn't just your testimony. This is a ripple in the spirit. Because your stance, your resilience, your endurance, it's awakening something in others. You may never know how many people found strength because they saw you stand. You may never hear the full story of how your fire reignited someone else's fading flame. But heaven knows, and heaven is not finished with you. In fact, heaven is just getting started. So walk boldly into this new season, not with pride, but with posture, not seeking validation, but carrying confirmation. You are not the same, and you never will be. You've got mad heart, and now the world knows it too. If this message stirred your soul, comment mad heart below as a public declaration that fear no longer has dominion over you. Like, share, and subscribe so that more chosen ones, more silent warriors, can rise up with the same fire. And to those of you who have been blessing this channel through super thanks, I see you. I appreciate you deeply, and may God multiply your generosity in ways you never expected. But whether you've given or simply tuned in, thank you. Your time, your heart, your hunger for truth, it matters. It shapes this community into something sacred. So I bless you now, in the mighty name of Jesus Christ. May the boldness of lions rise in your spirit. May peace wrap around your mind like armor. May your steps be steady, your purpose be clear, and your fire never go out. You've got mad heart, and it's only the beginning. Amen. Chosen one, can you feel it? That sudden shift in the air, that undeniable sense that what was hidden is no longer protected. The walls that once shielded their lies are crumbling. You were never crazy. You were never overreacting. You were simply ahead of the evidence. And now, the evidence has arrived like a tidal wave, unstoppable, divine, and drenched in holy vindication. The very ones who laughed behind closed doors, your ex, that manipulative lawyer, and the corrupt cop they conspired with, once moved like shadows, confident that no one would ever connect the dots. But heaven has a memory, and it has finally answered. Their secrets are no longer secrets. Their schemes are no longer safe. The cover-up is unraveling in real time, and guess who's still standing? Comment 777. If you've ever been gaslit by a narrative you knew was false, if you've ever carried the truth in silence because the world wasn't ready to hear it, your moment has come. And to those of you who have supported this channel through super thanks, your faith has helped keep the flame of truth alive. Thank you, from the depths of a healed but once broken soul. So now the question must be asked. What happens when the whole town sees what you always knew? How do they explain the evidence you were never meant to find? And why are they suddenly so quiet, so shaken, so exposed? Keep watching, because what's coming next will not just vindicate your name. It will rewrite the entire narrative. God's chosen ones, ex-lover, dirty lawyers, and cops covered up the truth, but it's finally exposed. Where once your voice was drowned in dismissal and your truth met with cold stares, now an unstoppable wave of righteous fury is building. What once was denial has become exposure. What was gaslighting has become reckoning. And you, God's chosen one, stand not as a victim, but as the catalyst. The veil of secrecy is not merely lifting, it has been torn open like the curtain of the temple in Matthew 27:51. And behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split. That same divine disruption is shaking the ground beneath the feet of your accusers. How did so many fail to see through the performance? Why did they celebrate your downfall instead of questioning the story? Were they blind or just comfortable in the lie? Now they witness the slow collapse of the lie they defended. Every performance, every fake apology, every weaponized story is now played back in crystal clarity. Screenshots, recordings, deleted files recovered, money trails exposed. And as the dots connect, silence spreads, heavier than judgment. Your ex, the manipulator, their lawyer, the strategist of deceit, and the officer, a corrupted arm of power, each of them now stripped bare before a public that once praised them. Your ex wasn't merely reactive, they were strategic, turning minor misunderstandings into loaded traps. Like an engineer of emotional sabotage, they laid each brick of betrayal with precision. They practiced what behavioral psychology calls perception framing, shaping others' view of you through curated emotional displays and manipulated context. Each outburst, a misdirection, each tear, a weapon. The lawyer they enlisted turned courtrooms into arenas of illusion. Familiar with legal pathways, they bypassed justice by bending statutes into weapons of confusion. They forged documents with surgical skill, erased key phrases, inserted ambiguities. They used what cognitive linguists call semantic overload, burying judges and jurors in jargon until the truth drowned beneath complexity. They wore suits of honor while constructing walls of lies. The officer betrayed the very code of their badge, not through blatant tyranny, but subtle dismantling of justice. Surveillance tapes vanished, dates were altered, witnesses silenced through gentle suggestion. They didn't break the law, they twisted it just enough to fit their version of events. Isn't that how corruption thrives? Not by shouting in darkness, but by whispering in daylight. Just as the Apostle Paul was once Saul, zealous in persecuting the innocent until God blinded him and rerouted his calling. This moment is your Damascus. Those who accused you are being struck with the same blinding light of revelation. Their sight may return, but their status never will. And while some who once sided with them now offer hesitant apologies, you are not obligated to carry their guilt. Can sorrow undo the months you were made to feel insane? Can silence rebuild what doubt destroyed? Even their allies have begun to back away. Emails, voice memos, private group chats. Every shadowy whisper is now bathed in truth's relentless sunlight. What was once invisible is now archived, labeled undeniable. Angela Arendt's, former CEO of Burberry and executive at Apple, once said, "Integrity is doing the right thing when no one is watching." But what happens when you finally shine light on those who did everything wrong because they thought no one was watching? The world watches now, and not all infamous figures are born in headlines. Joseph James D'Angelo, known as the Golden State Killer, lived decades in peaceful disguise, serving as a cop, raising a family, while hiding the horrors he'd committed. When truth finally exposed him, the mask didn't just fall, it disintegrated. His neighbors, once defenders, became his judges. The courtroom was silent, not because of awe, but because of betrayal. That's the cost of deception. And while you may not see yourself as a hero, others do. Like Luis, a custodian who worked 18 years at a public school and was falsely accused of theft by the principal and assistant superintendent. His quiet integrity, however, won out. Surveillance footage proved his innocence and revealed that the real thief was the same principal who signed the report. Luis didn't raise his voice, but truth raised his platform. Even the wild teaches this pattern. The octopus, often underestimated in the predator hierarchy, can reconfigure its shape color, and texture in milliseconds, not just for defense but for mastery. In its silence and camouflage lies its advantage, but when exposed, it's a revelation to those who assumed dominance meant noise. So too, your silence was never weakness, it was strategy, and now you've emerged in divine clarity, fluid, ungraspable, unbound. Could they really have believed this would never come to light? Were they so deluded that they assumed heaven wouldn't intervene? How long did they think encrypted messages could stay hidden? What kind of person weaponizes love, law, and justice in one sweep? What happens when the foundation of a lie meets the earthquake of divine truth? What do people do when the person they discarded turns out to be God's vessel of revelation? This is more than vindication. This is divine reversal. Just like Joseph, sold by his brothers into slavery, falsely imprisoned, and yet lifted to power by God to save the very ones who betrayed him. Genesis 45. You, too, were buried under falsehood. But what they meant for evil, God is turning for good. You once watched the system twist itself into a serpent to strangle your truth. But now that same system coils back, this time to strike its original masters. It moves not with hesitation, but with the inevitability of divine timing. God has reconfigured the very architecture of power. What once closed against you now opens with fire. What once erased you now reintroduces you, this time not as the accused, but as the vessel of justice. You, God's chosen one, were never abandoned. Heaven simply allowed time to ferment the truth into something undeniable. And now, a new generation of officials, untouched by the corruption of your past, step into the arena. They do not arrive with bias, but with blueprints of righteousness. Have you ever seen a structure collapse from within? That is what is unfolding now, not by force but by resonance. Truth, like a perfectly tuned frequency, is vibrating through every institution they once weaponized. Files once marked as closed are reopened with reverence and focus. Long-deleted evidence surfaces, hard drives decrypted, receipts recovered, emails restored. Is it coincidence? Or is it, as Esther 4:14 reminds us, perhaps you were born for such a time as this? And so was your vindication? One by one, those who were once silent step forward, their voices no longer trembling, but rising like a crescendo. A woman once afraid to speak now presents a recording. A man who vanished from the city returns with documents. They arrive like rainfall on parched land, unavoidable, cleansing, and prophetic. What had been buried in fear now blooms in courage, and subpoenas thunder across the city like divine arrows. The papers land on desks and doorsteps like scrolls of judgment. Your ex, once smug in their safety, receives theirs with hands that can no longer fake steadiness. The lawyer, who thought the courtroom was their kingdom, now sees their name, centered, bold, unmistakable, on a court summons. The same law they distorted now becomes the blade that slices through their charade. Do you see how the spoken word has become a sword? Judges who once rubber-stamped every shady motion now reread each file with reluctant dread. Prosecutors, previously passive, now circle like hawks. Even defense attorneys who once smiled in their company now flee like rats from a sinking ship. No one wants to be tethered to a collapsing lie. And the badge, once their shield, it now burns in judgment. Internal affairs has arrived, not as a whisper, but as a force. Offices raided, laptops imaged, phone logs dissected, every breadcrumb of betrayal traced with forensic precision. What they built on secrecy is now being deconstructed by scrutiny, and scrutiny, unlike silence, cannot be bribed. Even the financial systems, the so-called silent accomplices, have turned. Banking regulators, accountants and fraud specialists now trace every wire transfer, offshore deposit and shell company name. Their fraud wasn't just moral, it was fiscal. And now the tax authorities weave together the tapestry of their deception: unreported income, falsified audits, and suspicious donations. What once appeared as wealth now registers as a liability. Do you remember how Pharaoh thought he could keep Israel enslaved forever, until God himself stepped into the story and every structure of oppression crumbled? Exodus 12. You too are watching an Exodus moment unfold. But instead of parting waters, it is parted lies. Instead of a Red Sea, it is a sea of evidence. Brian Stevenson, a human rights lawyer and founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, once said, "The opposite of poverty is not wealth. The opposite of poverty is justice." And now justice is moving not as a suggestion, but as a sentence. It is active. It is alive. It is holy. The unraveling has also reached into corners they never thought would betray them. Like Detective Raul Moreno, a real-life cop once honored for integrity, who turned on his former partner after discovering internal corruption. It was his testimony that led to the dismantling of a precinct-wide cover-up. The fallout was historic, but the cleansing was necessary. And in the quiet world of ordinary people, Dana, a paralegal who once processed forged documents for that corrupt lawyer, came forward. She risked her job, reputation, even her safety, because the weight of complicity crushed her conscience. Her affidavit became the linchpin of a case that many thought unsalvageable. She didn't wear a cape. She wore her truth. And in nature there is a force that mirrors your vindication. Lava tubes. Hidden beneath hardened earth, rivers of molten fire flow silently for years. No one sees them, but one tremor, one shift, and they erupt. The same ground that once appeared calm becomes a force of reckoning. So it is with you. Your truth flowed beneath the surface, and now the tremor has come. What happens when the evidence you needed now walks toward you? What do they do when their former allies testify against them? How do they defend against a justice system they no longer control? What happens when the badge turns its back? When the laws they manipulated rise to rebuke them? Can lies stand in a storm this orchestrated? Can the truth really stay buried when heaven itself starts unearthing it? For nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest, nor is anything secret that will not be known and come to light. Luke 8:17. That's not just a verse, it's a prophecy fulfilled in real time. You're watching this verse walk into courtrooms, into inboxes, into recorded testimonies. This is not just karma, this is kingdom justice. This is what happens when heaven advocates on behalf of one of its own. You are now living in the hour of exposure, where performance collapses and truth pierces every illusion. Every mask once used to charm, deflect, and deceive is now in freefall. The elaborate personas they constructed like stage sets are not just cracking, they're crumbling into dust. You, God's chosen one, no longer need to defend what the evidence is now shouting. What once demanded your tears now demands their accountability. What do people do when the narrative they defended begins to bleed? What happens when your silence becomes their sentence? How long can a lie survive in the oxygen of unveiled truth? Every moment that once felt like emotional whiplash, those charming smiles turned accusations, the crocodile tears at just the right time, the sudden bursts of false vulnerability are now proven to be intentional. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't miscommunication. It was a weaponized art form of emotional manipulation rooted in performance psychology and gaslighting theory. You were not imagining it. You were enduring it. And now, that endurance is backed by evidence. Their private messages are no longer private. Their strategy is no longer veiled. In one thread with the lawyer, you're labeled a threat to neutralize, not a person to understand. In another, with the crooked officer, they casually discuss illegal surveillance like weekend plans. And perhaps most chilling of all, discussions about financial assets, your assets, reduced to cold numbers, divided like war spoils between conspirators. There was never love there was leverage. You were never in a relationship. You were a resource. And now that the illusion has shattered, even their closest allies are stunned into silence. Friends who once echoed their stories now step away. Family members who swore by their character begin to remember inconsistencies. Former colleagues no longer meet their eyes. The mask didn't just slip, it shattered. Do you remember Judas's kiss in Gethsemane? Luke 22:48. It wasn't the kiss that wounded. It was the betrayal behind it. You were kissed with lies, embraced by intentions designed to drain you. And now the betrayal is public, undeniable, unspinnable. Brian Stevenson, renowned civil rights lawyer, said, "Each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done. But what about those whose worst was systematic, prolonged and planned? What about those who made a career from cruelty?" Their panic now shows in every move. Conflicting statements to different people, lies that begin to contradict earlier lies, interviews that fall apart under expert scrutiny. Every attempt at public redemption only accelerates their descent. Legal experts now analyze their words frame by frame, showing how even their apologies are evidence. The more they speak, the more the rot is revealed. And that rot is not new, it's generational, it has roots. The fruit of corruption did not grow in isolation. It came from soil tainted by a family system that normalized manipulation, deception, and dominance. Parents who trained them to prioritize image over integrity. Siblings who tracked your every step, feeding back information like spies in a house of mirrors. Aunts, uncles, cousins, some silent, some paid to stay that way. Now every member who touched the scheme is facing scrutiny. The family had always called you different, too sensitive, too intuitive, too strong. But the truth is, you were too awake. You disrupted their ecosystem of control. That's why they tried to erase you. Because your presence exposed the mold they called tradition. Financially, the scheme was more intricate than even you imagined. Shared properties, fake inheritances, fabricated salaries in fake companies run by relatives. But now, forensic accountants trained in tracing offshore webs are dismantling it all. What was once hidden in false business ledgers is now clear in high-resolution audits. And like Proverbs 13:11 declares, wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it. The money they built through deceit is dissolving. The empires forged in fraud are melting like wax. Gloria, a mid-level HR director who'd long suspected her sister's sudden wealth was tied to corruption, finally stepped forward. Her report to the Financial Crimes Unit triggered a chain of audits. In one folder, she found payroll records for employees who didn't exist, including a paycheck issued in your name months after you'd left the company. She didn't seek drama. She sought justice, and now her bravery is part of your redemption. Even the natural world reveals this pattern. The timber rattlesnake, long underestimated, emits a quiet rattle before it strikes, not out of fear but warning. But when pushed too far, it sheds the warning and delivers fatal precision. You gave the warning. Now justice strikes, not out of vengeance, but out of alignment. Were they so convinced that power made them untouchable? Did they believe generational wealth was the same as divine favor? How long did they think manipulation could pass for love? Why did they assume your silence meant weakness? How did they mistake your patience for permission? And what happens now when even the system they rigged begins to echo your name? This is not just revelation. This is retribution. And it's not man-made, it's orchestrated from heaven. Under the crushing weight of exposure, the same family that once stood in cold agreement now begins to fracture like ice under heat. Memories once sharp become suddenly foggy. Conversations that were crystal clear when weaponized against you are now misremembered. Some relatives rush to reposition themselves, not as perpetrators, but as casualties. They scramble to rewrite their roles in the narrative, hoping proximity to your pain can shield them from accountability. But heaven is not accepting rewrites. The script is sealed. Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. Ephesians 5:11. That scripture is no longer theory, it's your reality. You are the living fulfillment of that command, and their shadows are shrinking under your light. What happens when generational protection becomes generational prosecution? How long can secrets remain sacred when they are soaked in injustice? Can a name be honorable if it is built on another's silence? The illusion of family unity was always fragile, held together by manipulation, fear, and image management. Now the cracks are not just visible, they are audible. Whispered calls, nervous texts, discreet meetings with investigators. A few elders, sensing the end of their influence approaching, make quiet deals. I don't want to carry this to my grave, one confesses. They finally surrender documents hidden in closets, letters tucked in attic boxes, receipts folded into Bibles like bookmarks of guilt. They aren't just defending against the law now, they're confronting eternity. And in this holy unveiling, it becomes clear their assault wasn't merely legal or emotional. It was spiritual warfare dressed in family dinners, false forgiveness, and passive-aggressive prayers. They weren't just after your reputation, they targeted your perception. They engineered what neuropsychologists call reality fragmentation, gaslighting that disrupts cognitive coherence. Every time they questioned your memory, denied your experience, or told you you were too sensitive, they were manipulating the neurological compass that anchored you to truth. But what they couldn't extinguish was your discernment. You weren't just intuitive, you were spiritually equipped. Like Daniel in Babylon, you had insight they couldn't explain, an ability to read the writing on the wall before others even noticed the wall, Daniel 5. Your capacity to perceive deception wasn't paranoia, it was prophecy, and that made you dangerous. Brené Brown, professor and researcher on vulnerability, once said, "The truth is uncomfortable, but the only thing more uncomfortable is not telling it." Your discomfort was never weakness. It was the cost of carrying truth in a family that feared it. But not everyone feared. Javier, your cousin who once stayed silent, began to review old financial records after overhearing a late-night argument. What he found, a trail of falsified medical bills submitted in your name to an insurance fraud ring run by two uncles, shattered him. It took months, but he stepped forward. His affidavit, unexpected and precise, added another undeniable layer to the growing mountain of evidence. His courage proved that not all bloodlines carry the same code. And still deeper than fear was envy. They saw your energy like light through a prism, too varied, too brilliant, too holy to control. So they did what weak spirits always do. They tried to drain you, financially, emotionally, spiritually. You became the scapegoat for dysfunction they refused to confront, the emotional sponge for their guilt, the mirror they tried to break because it reflected too much truth. Even when the lies surrounded you like fog on the moor, your inner compass never broke. You doubted, yes. You cried, absolutely. But your flame, however faint, never died. Like a deep-sea anglerfish who navigates pitch-black depths with a bioluminescent glow from within, you guided yourself through deception when no external light was available. They underestimated the luminescence of your resilience. Was it mere chance that your spirit survived when others collapsed? Was it luck that you sensed what others ignored? Why did they fight so hard to convince you of a lie, unless they feared the power of your truth? Who taught them to manipulate so thoroughly, unless someone had modeled that poison first? And why did your presence provoke such discomfort, unless it threatened the system that fed them? Even in your most exhausted state, heaven refused to let your truth disappear. You were surrounded by distortion, but protected by frequency. The Holy Spirit operated like sonar, vibrating divine truth through the waters of chaos, echoing back with direction when all you could do was feel. And now you stand in the moment Paul described in Galatians 6:9. Let us not grow weary in doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. This is your season, not of survival, but of sacred harvest. Quick pause, family. If your spirit is vibrating in agreement with this message, if something deep inside you is being stirred, this is your confirmation. You're not imagining it. This is real. This is prophetic. And if you feel led to support this sacred mission of unmasking, healing, and divine truth-telling, your seed helps sustain a space where light breaks lies and heaven speaks. And if you're feeling this word, drop 88 in the comments. It's the number of new beginnings doubled. And today, your breakthrough is not just coming, it's being documented. Now, let's go deeper. The paper trail they tried to hide is now becoming the scaffold of their downfall. Bank logs, property deeds, and tax returns, once crafted with quiet arrogance, are now in open view. What they counted on being buried under bureaucracy is now being resurrected by expert hands. The very systems they corrupted are testifying against them. What happens when their own fingerprints become the evidence? How do you hide a crime when the ledger itself speaks? What if every transaction is a sentence in the story of their undoing? Financial forensic teams now move like surgeons, unpeeling layers of deception with precise tools. They trace unusual transfers made at hours that didn't align, large deposits just before court hearings, asset titles moved between family members, offshore entities that appear just long enough to intercept your inheritance, then disappear. But, like Proverbs 10:9 declares, whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but whoever takes crooked paths will be found out. That time has come. Your ex's lawyer wasn't sloppy, they were surgical. They knew exactly how to falsify without leaving fingerprints, until now. Signatures extracted under emotional duress, deadlines manipulated so oversight wouldn't catch the switch. Legal filings dressed as routine but laced with deceptive language, coded to benefit the wrong party. They relied on what architecture calls structural camouflage, designing frameworks that look strong from the outside but collapse under true weight. And now the pressure is finally on. Every innocent error they once blamed on clerical mistakes is exposed as calculated sabotage. Nothing about this was accidental. It was premeditated fraud presented as formality. The corrupt officer made sure investigations never reached ignition. They didn't just delay, they dismantled. Surveillance footage lost, witnesses intimidated under the guise of protocol, leads intentionally diverted like rivers rerouted through artificial dams. But like all unnatural engineering, the truth has found cracks. And now, experts trained in following financial trails, auditors, compliance attorneys, intelligence analysts, are pulling back every layer. One-use accounts created for hush payments, cash used to disrupt digital trails, properties passed between third parties in circular patterns designed to confuse jurisdiction. Their whole empire of illusion is unraveling. Eli Honig, former federal prosecutor, once said, "The cover-up is often more damaging than the crime itself." And that is what's happening now. The deception has become the noose. Even those who once stood at the edges of the conspiracy, co-workers, friends, distant relatives, can no longer sleep soundly. Their hands may not have drawn the blueprints, but they helped carry the bricks. And now, with headlines emerging and subpoenas increasing, they begin to whisper their doubts. A few begin to talk. One voice becomes two, and suddenly silence is no longer safe. Maya, an assistant to the tax attorney who helped obscure assets, begins to notice inconsistencies in the files. She finds an unfiled copy of a transfer deed in your name. Something in her conscience awakens. Her testimony becomes the key that opens an entire new thread of inquiry. She doesn't seek fame, she seeks freedom from guilt. What if she had stayed silent? What if no one came forward? What if you had accepted the loss as final? What happens now that the lie is collapsing in real time? Can stolen legacy withstand divine pursuit? Can money wash away what was rooted in malice? In nature, the mantis shrimp, a small but extraordinary creature, can see polarized light invisible to the human eye. It detects patterns that predators cannot hide, perceiving threats embedded in illusion. You, like the mantis shrimp, were made to see beneath surfaces, and now what you sensed intuitively is being confirmed materially. So stand firm. The evidence that was once hidden is not just appearing, it is crying out. Heaven is making sure the ledger speaks, and this time, no hand can erase your name from what is rightfully yours. The badge, once worn with pride, now feels like an iron collar. And what of the extended family who enabled it all? 2 relatives who received gifts from shell companies are being audited. One quietly sells property to cover legal fees. Another deletes social media entirely. Their names, once linked to prestige, now trend alongside words like fraud, embezzlement, and cover-up. Their social capital burns like dry grass under a magnifying glass of scrutiny. And Maya, the assistant who came forward, watches all this unfold from a distance. She is safe, protected, redeemed. Her courage marked her apart from the rest. Where they are falling, she is rising. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness. Isaiah 5:20. This isn't just justice, it is divine correction. The line they blurred has now become a sword. The law moves slowly, but when heaven accelerates timing, even the slowest wheels of justice begin to spin like thunder. You always knew that you weren't crazy, you were early. The patterns you saw, the silences you felt, the glances exchanged behind your back, they weren't imagination. They were signals, warnings, clues. And now, the walls that once gaslit you into questioning your own discernment are beginning to crack. Not because you shouted louder, but because others finally started whispering the same truth. First, there's the legal assistant, quiet, methodical, afraid. She'd noticed irregularities for years, documents signed out of sequence, folders replaced too quickly, entire files missing after hallway conversations, but fear kept her quiet. Fear of being ostracized, fear of losing her job, fear of being labeled emotional or unstable, just as they labeled you. But now she speaks. She sends an encrypted file to an independent investigator. She forwards time-stamped emails. She holds the line. Then comes the junior officer, young, disillusioned, watching procedure after procedure violated without accountability. He had seen evidence discarded before logging, witnesses redirected mid-testimony, internal reports subtly rewritten by supervisors. At the time he buried it, trauma response. But now something shifts. Courage is contagious. He logs a formal report. He keeps copies. He names names. Even your ex's friend, the one who had dismissed you with a half smile and averted eyes, finds themselves haunted by scenes they once ignored. They remember overheard calls, deleted voice memos, statements that never sat right. They begin drafting an affidavit. Truth has begun to thaw the silence. What happens when a single voice becomes a symphony? What happens when the smallest confession opens the biggest door? How long can darkness survive when even the quiet ones begin to carry torches? These whistleblowers, once paralyzed by fear, now become the heartbeat of revelation. They approach with caution at first. Anonymous tips, untraceable calls, USBs slid into secure hands. They preserved screenshots when told to clear their devices. They kept voice recordings hidden behind password layers. Some even jotted notes on napkins and receipts. because something inside refused to let the truth die quietly. And then the threshold is crossed. A particularly trusted insider, someone close enough to the inner sanctum to be included in planning, strategy, and celebration, finally breaks. They had watched you be destroyed in real time, and guilt became unbearable. This person, their identity sealed under protection, had preserved everything. Email chains, recorded Zoom calls, handwritten instructions, even paper trails meant to be burned. And with one carefully delivered archive, they provide the skeleton key that unlocks the vault, and everything changes. What started as drops of truth becomes a flood. As more revelations surface, those who once feared becoming the only one realize they're not alone. There's safety in alignment, strength in collective memory, courage in confirmation. The floodgates break. In psychology, this is called a systemic tipping point, the moment when exponential change becomes inevitable. And that's what's happening now. Like a fault line shifting under tectonic pressure, truth is erupting. Not gradually, but violently, unstoppably. Frances Haugen, the whistleblower who exposed Facebook's internal harms, once said, "Until incentives change, Facebook will not change." But you are now witnessing what happens when the incentive becomes righteousness, when people choose eternity over endorsement. And once the shift begins, it cannot be reversed. Even the most hardened system cannot withstand universal corroboration. The conspiracy collapses under its own weight. Like a black hole reaching critical mass, it implodes, not in silence but in public shame. Mark Ciavarella, once a respected judge in Pennsylvania, is living proof of what happens when legal robes are used to disguise personal profit. He orchestrated what would later be exposed as the infamous Kids for Cash scandal, where he accepted millions in kickbacks from for-profit juvenile detention centers in exchange for sentencing thousands of minors, many for minor infractions. On the surface, he ruled with authority, but behind closed doors, he traded justice for greed. In 2011, he was sentenced to 28 years in federal prison. His courtroom, once a symbol of law, became the stage of one of the most grotesque betrayals of public trust in American judicial history. And his legacy, forever stained. His name, once spoken with respect, is now synonymous with systemic evil exposed. Meanwhile, Nia, a young graduate intern who had always believed in justice, quietly uploads a folder to the investigative task force. Her digital evidence, casually collected, innocently stored, contains proof of altered timestamps that only someone at her clearance level could have noticed. She doesn't speak publicly, but her folder breaks a chain of command that had protected the guilty for years. Have you ever seen a dam break in slow motion? Water pressure mounts for days. Cracks appear like veins on concrete. A whisper becomes a roar. And then, suddenly, nothing can hold it back. That's what's happening now. The flood of truth is no longer asking permission. For the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are all who wait for him. Isaiah 30:18. And now, you're no longer waiting, you're watching it unfold. As the storm of truth intensifies, the once unbreakable alliance between your adversaries begins to fracture, precisely as you sensed it would. The walls they built to imprison you are now closing in on them, and their unity begins to unravel under pressure like fabric strained past its tensile limit. Where they once spoke in lockstep, now they contradict, deflect, and betray. And in their unraveling, the depth of their guilt is revealed. Your ex, who orchestrated much of the damage, suddenly casts themselves as the true victim. They say they were misled, manipulated, that the lawyer exploited their emotional state, that they were grieving, confused. They claim they never truly understood the implications. But the timelines don't lie. Their signatures sit on too many forms. Their voice echoes in too many recordings. What kind of innocence requires that much destruction to defend it? The lawyer, cornered by mounting evidence, pivots to protect themselves. I was just following client instructions, they insist. Attorney-client privilege prevents me from revealing more. But investigators know better. They've seen the emails, the missing documents, the altered timestamps, and they've studied the legal loopholes designed not for clarity, but concealment. The corrupt officer? They blame the system itself. They cite culture, chain of command, unspoken expectations. Their statements drip with victimhood and vague appeals to departmental dysfunction. But they were not powerless. They were participants. And now, even that shield of systemic anonymity is being pierced. Their panic is no longer subtle. Deleted threads, documents shredded, computer malfunctions that conveniently erase data from key dates. In some homes, literal fires erupt in file drawers, too perfectly timed to be coincidence. But investigators recognize this behavior for what it is: consciousness of guilt. In criminal psychology, it's called preemptive sabotage, the destruction of evidence not just to conceal, but to confess without admitting. Ironically, the very attempts to cover their tracks become markers, a roadmap. Every gap points to a secret. Every deleted message raises a new question. The paperless trail speaks louder than paper ever did. Their unity evaporates like morning mist under judgment's sun. What was once a coordinated machine of deceit now splinters into rival tribes. Immunity deals are whispered behind closed doors. The ex offers incriminating emails. The lawyer provides details on financial transfers. The officer volunteers secrets about who gave the go-ahead and when. Self-preservation becomes their only doctrine. They have become exactly what they feared: alone. In legal history, few cases illustrate this unraveling better than Jeffrey Skilling, former CEO of Enron. Once at the helm of one of America's largest companies, Skilling oversaw a massive fraud scheme that led to the collapse of Enron and the loss of billions in pensions and savings. As the walls closed in, executives turned on one another, trading testimony to save themselves. Unity became an illusion. Skilling was sentenced to 24 years in prison, and his legacy now stands as a monument to corporate betrayal and ego-driven collapse. But in contrast, Ben Ferencz, the last living Nuremberg prosecutor before his passing, spent his entire life pursuing justice, quietly, diligently, faithfully. His famous quote echoes through this moment: "Law, not war. Truth, not terror. Justice, not revenge." You now stand on that same battlefield, and justice, not revenge, is finally speaking. Meanwhile, Kara, a former payroll technician who once processed suspicious payments under pressure, decides to break the silence. She forwards internal memos she was instructed to discard. Her simple act, born from late-night conviction, brings clarity to one of the most complex financial loops in the case. She may never testify on a stage, but her document becomes a turning point. Nature holds a mirror to what's unfolding. The cicada killer wasp, known for capturing prey and burying it alive to feed its young, eventually forgets where it buried the bodies. Its instinct served a selfish purpose, but even nature enforces consequence. You can only bury the truth for so long before what you thought was forgotten begins to rot, rising to the surface with a stench no excuse can cover. And when everything they built to hide their sin becomes the very evidence of it, what then? Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that will he also reap. Galatians 6:7. And now the harvest has arrived. They planted manipulation and are reaping exposure. They sowed control and are harvesting chaos. Their desperate efforts to rewrite the past are not only unconvincing, they are embarrassing. What once masqueraded as control now reeks of collapse. They stumble through awkward justifications, claiming confusion where there was coordination, misunderstanding where there was manipulation, oversight where there was orchestration. Their lies bend under scrutiny like metal under stress, each excuse more laughable than the last. He who justifies the wicked and he who condemns the righteous are both alike an abomination to the Lord. Proverbs 17:15. And that's what they did, justified the wicked, condemned the righteous. But heaven has reversed the verdict. What happens when the only defense left is denial? How long can anyone pretend when evidence speaks in chorus? What do you call it when the truth you lived is louder than the lies they crafted? They are now trapped in the chaos of their own contradictions. Their attempts to reframe are not clever, they're clumsy. Legal jargon twisted in ways that only deepen suspicion. Timelines that fall apart under cross-examination. Emotional appeals that no longer land because their credibility has dissolved. The more they speak, the more they reinforce the narrative you held all along. Not one born from bitterness, but from discernment. You were never paranoid. You were early. You weren't unstable. You were awake. And now the world is catching up. Everything they tried to bury has risen like seeds under pressure. Emails, contracts, surveillance records, forgotten witness accounts. Layer by layer, they confirm what your spirit never let go of. Each piece of data, each whistleblower, each recovered file becomes a beam in the structure of your vindication. The justice being built now is not a favor, it's a restoration. Those who once rolled their eyes now lower their gaze. Some approach you quietly, apologizing with voices softened by shame. Others can't find words, but their presence, awkward, reverent, is an unspoken admission. You were right all along. What do they do now that the truth has outlived the gaslighting? What do you do with those who were silent when you were suffering? Can repentance coexist with memory? Can dignity survive delay? Your refusal to bend when it would have been easier to break was not just resistance, it was prophetic defiance, what social engineers call narrative coherence under coercion. The rare strength to maintain a truthful internal compass despite social, emotional, and institutional manipulation. You didn't just survive, you maintained accuracy, and that is what's rebuilding your reputation now. Not pity, but precision. As your vindication gathers momentum, doors once sealed shut creak open. Emails you were once excluded from now bear your name in the to field. Rooms that had whispered against you now invite your voice. The social infrastructure that once exiled you is being restructured, brick by brick, in your favor. Professional opportunities resurface. Partnerships that once dissolved begin to re-emerge. Recommendations, grants, proposals, resources that were once denied you begin circling back. Your name now carries weight, not because it was cleared, but because it endured. Not because others finally believed, but because heaven never stopped backing you. Nature reflects this reversal. The chameleon, when surrounded by hostile environments, doesn't merely hide. It absorbs, adapts, waits. But when conditions align, it returns to full vibrancy, revealing colors that were never lost, only protected. Like that, your true self is not a reinvention. It is a re-emergence. Erin Brockovich, once a single mother turned legal clerk with no formal law degree, was ridiculed and dismissed until her perseverance helped uncover one of the largest toxic contamination scandals in US history. Her vindication wasn't just legal, it was cultural. What once made her too much became what made her legendary. By contrast, Carlos Ghosn, once hailed as a business genius leading multiple automotive giants, orchestrated his own escape after being charged with massive financial misconduct. The higher his platform, the louder the crash. Today, he's a fugitive, living proof that corruption might buy time, but never peace. And Devon, a former intern at a consulting firm who noticed unusual vendor payments linked to the conspirators, quietly documented everything. While others were distracted by scandal's noise, he compiled a 36-page report. Evidence now central to an internal audit that validated your claims. He was not powerful, but he was prepared. What do you call someone who walks through hell and doesn't smell like smoke? What do you call someone who loses everything but never loses themselves? You are not just someone who suffered injustice. You are a living testimony. You are a prophetic disruption. You are the evidence that endurance is holy. And as your name is restored, Isaiah 61:7 becomes your reality. Instead of your shame, you will receive a double portion, and instead of disgrace, you will rejoice in your inheritance. The community begins to awaken. What started as whispered disbelief becomes public outrage. The lies they once applauded are now seen for what they were, performances, not character. Shock spreads like electricity through the circuits of social networks. The energy shifts, the system trembles, and the veil that once blinded the masses is torn, not by force, but by truth. The Lord detests lying lips, but he delights in people who are trustworthy. Proverbs 12:22. The world is beginning to delight in your trustworthiness now, not because you're trying to prove it, but because your life has already proved it. What do people do when the image they worshipped is exposed as false? How does a community rebuild when its heroes were villains and its outcast was right? What happens when the one they ignored becomes the voice they now need? How many apologies can mend the harm caused by silence? Those who once publicly aligned themselves with your ex, those drawn in by the charm, the curated empathy, the weaponized vulnerability, now back away in visible discomfort. Their brunches are no longer posted. Their smiles don't reach their eyes. Your ex's name becomes difficult to say without shame. They may still attempt control, but the community has disengaged from the spell. Colleagues of the disgraced lawyer begin to examine their memories under a new lens. That sarcastic joke in the meeting, that redacted memo, that deal they pushed too hard for, what once seemed clever now feels complicit. Respect has turned into careful distance. And the corrupt officer? People who once praised their firmness now wonder what they missed. Parents whisper about old cases. Local press publishes investigations. Past victims begin to re-emerge. Their badge no longer signifies authority. It signifies betrayal. Organizations that once blacklisted you issue careful statements. We acknowledge the new findings. We were unaware of the full extent. Their words are filtered through public relations departments, but their tone has changed. Professional references reappear, glowing, generous. Invitations arrive from the very circles that once cut you off without warning. What kind of reversal causes the same doors that slammed shut to now open with urgency? What kind of vindication causes shame to switch sides? What do you call it when the accused becomes the advisor, when the silenced becomes the standard? The entire social infrastructure that once reinforced your exile is now collapsing on itself, not through revenge, but through recalibration. Truth is reconfiguring the community's architecture. Out of nowhere, support emerges. Donations, legal aid, public endorsements, and most miraculous of all, belief, real belief. Belief not because it's trending, but because it's true. People you never expected now speak loudly in your defense. Their voices are uncoached. Their tone is righteous. Individuals who had endured similar betrayals but lacked the strength or platform now rise from the shadows. They say your name with reverence because it gave them courage to say their own. Brandon, a former university researcher who was ostracized for speaking out about academic fraud, sees your story and contacts your legal team. His case, dismissed years ago, has evidence that overlaps yours. His courage reignites. He volunteers data, timeline maps, a complete archive. Your victory becomes his reawakening. Just like Monica Lewinsky, once the target of global ridicule and character assassination, whose story was hijacked by power structures and political agendas. For decades she was silenced and shamed, but she reclaimed her voice, not with bitterness, but with purpose. Her TED Talk on public shaming and digital justice has inspired millions. What was once used to destroy her has become her platform to restore dignity for herself and countless others. By contrast, Harvey Weinstein, once one of Hollywood's most powerful producers, used his influence to silence, intimidate, and exploit. For years, he orchestrated settlements, PR campaigns, and insider protection. But truth caught up. In 2020, he was convicted of rape and sexual assault and sentenced to 23 years in prison. His empire collapsed, awards rescinded. His name is now a cautionary tale, and every attempt to redefine his story has failed because justice didn't just visit him, it buried the lie he built. Meanwhile, professionals with skills, lawyers, therapists, forensic experts, start offering their services, not for profit, but because your resilience reawakened their own sense of purpose. Some say nothing at all. They simply show up, do the work, and disappear again. That's what righteousness attracts, quiet power. Nature mirrors this resurrection. The mycelium network beneath a forest, an underground web of communication between trees, redirects nutrients toward the ones under attack. Trees long thought isolated begin receiving unexpected aid through hidden roots. So it is with you. Connection is returning. Support is flowing from unseen places. You were never alone. You were just ahead. What kind of justice rearranges an entire ecosystem to restore one person? What kind of God waits until the mocking stops to begin the miracle? What happens when your scars become maps for others to find their way? You're not just being reaccepted, you're being restored. And as the tide turns fully in your favor, you step into the reality of Psalm 126, 5-6. Those who sow in tears shall reap with shouts of joy. He who goes out weeping shall come home with shouts of joy, bringing his sheaves with him. This is your return, not in pieces, but in glory, not as a cautionary tale, but as a catalyst. He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the ash heap. He seats them with princes and has them inherit a throne of honor. 1 Samuel 2:8. That verse has now become the lens through which your story is interpreted. No longer the discarded, no longer the silenced. You are now the reference point, the standard for what happens when truth survives the fire. And the fire you walked through is now reshaping not only your life, but the architecture of trust in the community. People watch with awakened eyes. They speak with deeper caution. They now understand that power can manipulate, that charm can deceive, that systems are not always righteous, and that silence, if left unchecked, can be violence in disguise. What if your story was the catalyst the community didn't know it needed? What if the suffering you endured is now building immune systems against future corruption? What happens when your life becomes a shield for others? Your experience, once treated as a scandal to avoid, is now seen as a blueprint of vigilance. Parents teach their children discernment. Co-workers double-check policies. Social circles, once ruled by image, now crave integrity. And the legal system that once failed you, it moves now with intensity, like it has something to prove. Attorneys not only accept your case, they defend it with conviction. They see it not just as litigation, but as restitution. Judges prioritize it, aware that its resolution will echo far beyond the courtroom. The same legal mechanisms that once worked against you are now being activated for your full redemption. Financial assets that were hidden or withheld are returned with penalties, not apologies. Property once stripped from you is restored, with interest and public acknowledgement. Doors that were slammed shut now open on their own, as if recognizing the delay was never just procedural, it was spiritual theft. Opportunities you once had to mourn are now revisited. Scholarships, partnerships, professional pathways you were forced to surrender are brought back to the table, not as charity, but as justice. What kind of reversal pays back time and respect? How do you quantify restoration when it goes beyond the material? What is the value of dignity returned? How many careers are rebuilt on the truth someone else tried to bury? Brittany Griner, once detained under false pretenses in a foreign land, became a symbol of resilience and international advocacy. Her name, once the center of political chess, is now attached to courage, endurance, and the unshakable resolve of reclaiming what was taken. Her return was not just personal, it was prophetic. It shifted conversations about injustice, visibility, and worth. In contrast, Elizabeth Holmes, once celebrated as a genius innovator, manipulated trust at the highest levels. But the system she used to climb was the same one that ultimately exposed her. Sentenced to over 11 years in prison, her story is now a warning. Charisma without truth is a slow collapse disguised as brilliance. And then there's Lena, a local archivist who had access to hidden property records that had been quietly transferred out of your name. For years she didn't know the full story, just that something felt wrong. When your truth came to light, she checked again. What she found completed the paper trail. Her testimony reopened a key land dispute and returned what was rightfully yours. New allies rise, not out of sympathy, but reverence. People who see the wisdom you carry because you've walked through hell without losing your light. They are not impressed by your pain. They are transformed by your perseverance. And they come not to save you, but to stand beside you. The fire-dependent lodgepole pine releases its seeds only through intense heat. Without fire, it cannot multiply. Without being scorched, it cannot grow. You are the same. The trauma didn't end you. It activated the future you didn't even know was coded into your spirit. What if the loneliness was training? What if the betrayal was pruning? What if you were never losing, only being refined? What if your story was never about revenge, but about legacy? And now, with everything returned and more, Isaiah 54:17 rings like a decree over your name. No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue which rises against you in judgment you shall condemn. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord. You didn't just survive the accusation, you outlived the accusers. You didn't just clear your name, you changed the standard. You didn't just win, you became the reason others will never lose. Throughout this entire ordeal, something greater than law, louder than evidence and deeper than logic was at work. What others called coincidence, you now recognize as orchestration. Moments that looked random, an email unsent, a document misplaced, a stranger arriving with just the right question, were not accidents. They were divine intersections. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them. Psalm 34:7. And truly, those encampments were real, even if invisible to those who trafficked only in earthly power. They underestimated not just you, but the presence that backed you. What if every closed door was timed to prevent sabotage? What if the delay was designed to reveal what would have remained hidden had justice arrived too early? What if the pain was permission for heaven to intervene in a way that would leave no doubt? Your adversaries built their entire strategy on what they could see: money, influence, legal reach, media manipulation. But they never accounted for the unseen realm, the space where God whispers, where purpose overrides protocol, where timing is guided by revelation, not routine. Their attacks activated a spiritual kinetic field around you. What they sent to wound you became waves of transformation. Every attempt to erase you embedded your truth deeper into the record. Every weapon they formed forged your discernment. Every social exile expanded your spiritual territory. They meant to scatter you, but their shaking forced your roots deeper into the soil of the sacred. What kind of power mistakes silence for weakness? What arrogance believes it can rewrite a destiny written before time began? How many trials must one soul endure before others recognize divine anointing is not optional, it's inherited? How does one explain a justice that operates in dreams, whispers, and alignments no human hand could schedule? What if every insult was anointing in disguise? What happens when what they use to discredit you becomes the evidence that heaven endorsed you all along? The universal law of opposition played out with mathematical elegance. Like Newton's third law, every action they took against you generated an equal and opposite response in your favor. What they thought was fragmentation was actually recalibration. Their sabotage became your sanctuary. You would not have chosen this road, but now you know. The fire didn't consume you, it consecrated you. This wasn't just vindication, this was initiation. You were not just tested, you were tempered. And now the gifts you carry cannot be explained, only embodied. The wisdom isn't written in journals, it's written in scars. And those scars, they shine. Clarissa, a former litigation analyst who once quietly observed the attacks but said nothing, now stands beside you, not with excuses, but with action. She's organized a coalition of professionals using your case as precedent to change institutional practices. Her silence became strategy, and now her loyalty speaks louder than applause. In contrast, Bernard Madoff, the infamous architect of one of the largest Ponzi schemes in history, manipulated trust on a grand scale. His web of illusion was sophisticated, but fragile. When it collapsed, he lost not only fortune, but legacy. Dying in prison, he left behind a trail of shattered families and irredeemable guilt. Power without ethics always devours itself. Meanwhile, Mahalia, a widowed schoolteacher who watched your story unfold quietly from afar, sends a handwritten letter. She'd once believed the lies, but now she includes a check, small but sacrificial, and a note that says, "I see now, and I honor your courage." Her repentance births renewal. Your truth has restored more than reputation. It has redeemed hearts. Even the natural world confirms what's happened. The volcanic archipelago, a formation of islands born from pressure under oceans, does not rise in peace. It is shaped in fire, quakes, resistance, and yet it becomes new land, new structure. That's you. What once shook you, raised you. And now, as this long chapter of Revelation closes, it becomes clear. This was never just about justice. It was about formation, reformation, resurrection. You now walk not with answers, but with instincts, not just healed, but honed. You no longer question the truth. You embody it. The allies that now surround you were not found. They were revealed, refined, filtered through fire. Their loyalty is not loud. It's proven. The relationships now standing beside you were not built on proximity, but on principle. Gone are the days of keeping peace at the cost of clarity. Gone are the handshakes wrapped in manipulation. Gone are the hollow congratulations from people who once prayed for your collapse. Now you are surrounded by covenant, not convenience. And as you rise, Zechariah 2:5 declares your new reality. "For I will be a wall of fire around her, declares the Lord, and I will be the glory in her midst." You held your truth like a torch in a windstorm, refusing to let the flame die. Now, that very torch illuminates the path not just for you, but for a generation watching from the shadows. The spiritual strength forged through betrayal, mockery, and isolation is no longer just endurance. It is your unshakable foundation, a base more stable than stone, more refined than gold. You've become a structure that survived the quake, and now every beam of your being radiates divine resilience. How many times did you question your sanity while standing alone? How often did you second-guess your instincts when others mocked your discernment? And yet, every time you chose truth over comfort, you honed a weapon sharper than any sword, your spiritual intuition. What once felt like hypersensitivity now becomes a calibrated instrument of insight. As you enter this new terrain, you don't just feel relieved, you feel magnetized. The energy fields around you are no longer distorted, they're echoing your internal alignment. In physics, resonance occurs when a system vibrates at its natural frequency. That's what's happening now. You're vibrating in truth, and the universe has synchronized to your signal. But what exactly is this sensation of doors unlocking, of paths parting like the Red Sea before Moses? Exodus 14:21. Why do things once immovable now dissolve in your presence? How do opportunities find you without effort? It's not magic, it's order, restored. It's the cosmic mechanism clicking back into place after years of misalignment. What you're witnessing is not just your personal redemption, it's systemic realignment. This is what happens when heaven corrects error through one willing vessel. Your exposure of the lie wasn't a local event, it triggered seismic shifts in spiritual geography. Others feel it, even if they can't name the source. Some wake in the middle of the night, compelled to confess. Others abandon long-held falsehoods, unable to bear the weight of dissonance. And many who once served the lie now seek the light. Why? Because you broke the spell. Because your courage created a blueprint, a spiritual architecture for others to escape manipulation. The psalmist declared, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Psalm 34:18. And now he uses those very crushed pieces to build monuments of awakening. You were crushed, but you weren't destroyed. You were buried, but now you bloom. Jane Goodall, a world-renowned primatologist, once endured ridicule from the male-dominated scientific world. They called her naive, sentimental, unqualified. But her commitment to integrity over acceptance rewrote the way humans understand animals, and more importantly, themselves. Today, her methods are standard. Her voice became a global call to empathy. Like you, she refused to bow to conformity, and in doing so, she changed the entire field. In contrast, Rudy Giuliani, once hailed as America's mayor after 9/11, spiraled into disgrace through repeated public deception and participation in efforts to overturn democratic processes. Once honored with awards and respect, he became entangled in lawsuits, disbarment hearings, and mounting evidence of unethical behavior. His credibility crumbled under the weight of his own contradictions. What began as legacy became liability. His fall wasn't immediate. It was cumulative, proving that when someone trades truth for influence, time itself becomes a witness against them. And then there's Aaron, a quiet IT technician at a private firm. For years, he noticed his manager rerouting funds from employee retirement accounts. No one listened. HR dismissed him until he exposed it anonymously. The ripple wasn't just financial, it restored trust to an entire company. Aaron never spoke publicly, but his refusal to enable corruption saved futures. Nature models this return to equilibrium. The axolotl, a rare amphibian, can regenerate entire limbs without scarring. It doesn't just survive damage, it reclaims design. That's you now, not just recovering, but regenerating, without bitterness, without spiritual scar tissue. Could it be that your entire journey was divinely encoded for this hour? Were you always meant to awaken those trapped in denial? How many others were watching in silence, waiting to see if truth could actually survive exposure? What if your pain was never punishment, but positioning? What if your life became the calibration for a generation's moral compass? What if your endurance wasn't just survival, but sacred leadership. Luke 21:13 declares, "And it will turn out for you as an occasion for testimony." That's what this moment is, an unfolding testimony, not a speech, a vibration, a transmission, a spiritual chain reaction. You didn't just survive corruption, you converted it into a code of truth. And now, every boundary you fought for becomes a sacred fence for someone else's protection. Every silence you broke becomes an invitation for others to speak. The laws of heaven are reactivating through your story. This wasn't just your vindication. It was the universe witnessing its own laws reassert themselves through your breath, your choices, your stand. This wasn't a lucky break. This was divine math, perfectly timed, cosmically orchestrated, unarguably holy. Now that the dust has settled and the shadows have scattered, you can finally exhale, not in defeat, but in holy vindication. What they buried was not your truth, but their own impending collapse. What they concealed was not your weakness, but your divine strength waiting to rise. Every hidden document, every forged statement, every whisper in dark corridors has been dragged into the light, not by your striving, but by heaven's timetable. You didn't need to beg for justice. Justice found you. You didn't need to scream to be heard. The silence of your obedience echoed louder than their lies. And now, with the whole world watching, you stand not as a victim of a crooked system, but as a witness of divine reversal. This wasn't just your personal breakthrough, it was a prophetic pattern being unveiled in the earth. What was once covered up is being uncovered. What was twisted is being straightened. And what was meant to destroy you has become the testimony that heaven is still writing through your life. As Isaiah 54:17 declares, "No weapon that is formed against thee shall prosper, and every tongue that shall rise against thee in judgment thou shalt condemn." So now step forward, not as someone coming out of a fight, but as someone who has already won. The scars you carry are not marks of shame, they are seals of survival. Your enemies orchestrated a spectacle, but God turned it into a stage. You became living proof that resurrection is possible even when the grave is still warm. If this message resonated with you, if it confirmed something in your spirit, or gave language to the silent war you've endured, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who needs to know they are not alone. Your story has power. Comment 777 below if you're ready to step fully into your comeback story. Or share your journey in the comments. We read every word, and we stand in prayer with you. To those who've supported us through super thanks donations, or even just a heartfelt prayer, we see you, we feel your love, and we are deeply grateful. Every offering, every share, every kind word fuels this mission to awaken, to restore, and to set captives free. Whether it's a seed, a share, or a silent amen whispered under your breath, you are part of this divine movement. Don't stop here. Watch our next video for a prophetic insight into the signs that confirm you were chosen before the foundations of the world were laid. There's more ahead, and it's glorious. Until then, may your name be mentioned in rooms you've never entered. May your truth echo louder than every lie spoken against you. May angels go before you to prepare what no man can block. And may peace, divine justice, and restoration wrap around you like a shield of fire. Blessings upon blessings to all the radiant souls watching. We love you. We see you. We honor your journey. See you in the next chapter.